out to all those whose families are at risk, and we're just going to do everything we can to respond and be supportive and helpful too.
Obviously, the loss of life is the primary concern right now in helping those who've been injured. But if you will, at least talk to me a little bit about the other impact of this building. This is, for example, as Tom and Katie and I have pointed out, the world financial center, the hub of finances in the world, if not at least here in the United States. What type of damage has been done to the financial infrastructure of this country?
The economic impact is something we can talk about as the days unfold. Right now, we still have to focus on making sure we save as many people as possible, help those who are injured, help with an orderly removal of the people who are leaving downtown and leaving the city. We're going to focus on that and be concerned about what may or may not be the economic consequences once the immediate crisis is passed.
All right, do you have plans to get down to this area?
Yes, I'm in the city, and I've been in touch with the mayor, and we're going to be continuing to do everything we can.
Governor, what about other emergency procedures for the city of New York in the next several days in terms of what's going to remain shut down and so on? A lot of people have this as a destination. A lot of people, millions of people live here.
Tom, right now we do have limited service out of the city. We have both the Metro North and Long Island Railroad running out. We have the George Washington Bridge open. The tunnels are shut for security reasons. We're not having traffic other than emergency traffic come into the city. And I think at this point it would be extremely unlikely that we're going to have many people coming into the city tomorrow. We're going to be continuing to try to deal with the horrendous situation downtown.
Thank you very much, Governor. I know it's been a long and difficult day, and it will go on for you and for all New Yorkers for a long, long time, unfortunately.
Well, our prayers are with the families and the people whose lives are still at risk.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
We want to go now, Matt, to Jim Miklaszewski, who is at the Pentagon. Jim, a lot of these flights were transcontinental flights, heavily loaded not only with passengers but with fuel.
That's right, Tom, and we just learned a few moments ago that the U.S. Navy is dispatching a couple of aircraft carriers from Norfolk, the JFK and the George Washington. One will be stationed off of New York. The other will be stationed in the Atlantic as close to Washington, D.C. as they can get. They'll be there to provide any possible military support that may be needed, including flying any kind of air cover should there be any additional warnings of any further terrorist attempted attacks. Now, as we stood here this morning, you can see the smoke is still billowing. The smoke just in the past few minutes has changed from black to white, a strong indication that they're throwing more water on the fire, as we saw from other vantage points. But the priority now is to get the fire under control. A casualty count is impossible at this point, Tom. As you've seen from the earlier pictures, the plane opened a huge wide gash in the side of the building. We're being told between the 4th and the 5th corridors. It smashed through the E and D rings, and people who were in that area tell me that debris and parts of the plane actually penetrated deep all the way into the B ring. There are 5 rings, A through E, and it entered in the E ring, so it plowed through a number of the rings. The priority now, as I said, is accounting for the casualties. Medevac helicopters have been flying in and out. You hear the ambulances.
Get a block or so to either side of this area that has been closed down because no one's being allowed around the Washington Monument, no one's being allowed around the Jefferson Memorial. You can see all the way back to National Airport, no planes are landing and taking off. But if you get a couple of blocks on either side of this area, the streets of Washington are teeming with people because many private businesses, the big law firms, the lobbying agencies, the other businesses that are a part of any metropolitan area, many of those have been shut down, and people are out in the streets, and they are in a state, I must say, of quiet rage. I said this before a little while ago, but I've never seen anything quite like the mood we're seeing right now. This is being taken very seriously, and my guess is, Dan, that those congressmen who are saying on Capitol Hill this is another Pearl Harbor, that is exactly a reflection of what the mood of the general public is, at least here in the nation's capital. Dan.
Another day that in American history will live in infamy. This is perhaps the most audacious terrorist attack that's ever taken place anywhere in the world. Quote, unquote, from Chris Yates, aviation expert at Jane's Transport in London. He said, "It takes a logistics operation from the terror group involved that is second to none. Only a very small handful of terror groups is on that list, I would name at the top of the list Osama bin Laden, unquote, Mr. Yates. Now, it should be noted that a number of U.S. intelligence operatives and those overseas have been saying for some time that to focus entirely on Osama bin Laden has been, quote, a mistake. And many of those people believe that countries such as Iraq, Iran, to name two, have been involved in efforts to deliver serious blows to the United States. But all of that is by way of background. I want to emphasize that nobody knows who's responsible for these attacks. It may be a long while before anybody knows who's responsible. And Bob Schieffer reported accurately that rage is one of the words of the day in Washington. However, what's been learned in the past, and this is according again to very experienced American diplomats and intelligence agencies, that naturally there's rage when something such as this happens, but that patience and thinking it through are very important carry-ons, follow-ups to rage. Much of that will be discussed in the days ahead as the U.S. government and the people of the United States think about the response to this new kind of war.
Over his head, it was an American Airlines plane. He could see the number on the plane. He could almost see the passengers inside as it went along the highway, started clipping off the high wires and the different light poles along the highway and slammed directly into the side of the Pentagon. As we said earlier, Peter, the aircraft penetrated deep inside the Pentagon. It is organized in rings from the E ring on the outside. It penetrated all the way into the A ring in the inner part of the Pentagon. After it burned for a number of minutes, a part of the building collapsed. By the time rescue workers could get in there, the destruction was just terrific.
John, do you have any sense of the casualties?
We don't have any sense, Peter, except the size of the medical operation that has been set up here is enormous. They are anticipating the casualties. Certainly the injured will be in the hundreds. I certainly don't want to speculate on those killed.
And John, it's a little hard to get a sense of the size sometimes for the picture. Can you describe maybe in feet or in yards how big a penetration this is?
The roof has collapsed, Peter. There is a chasm in the side of the Pentagon that is probably 200 or 300 feet across. From the roof of the Pentagon, there is this huge V shape that has collapsed. You can see deep inside the Pentagon from the street now.
This is into the inner courtyard of the Pentagon itself.
It's into the innermost ring of the Pentagon, Peter. I have not been able to get into the courtyard, but I was told that the penetration was all the way into the deepest ring of the Pentagon.
And John, the office building, the Pentagon is about, what, 6 stories high?
It's 5 stories above.
Okay. And our estimate is 50,000 total workers. We have no idea how many people had been trapped inside, how many were able to be evacuated.
And in fact, the official listing for the New York City Emergency Response Center is in the World Trade Center on the 23rd floor. We have been hearing from our reporters, our correspondents in the field, that field forces are being set up in various command centers, but the situation around the World Trade Center is extremely dangerous. It is somewhat chaotic. There have been a steady stream since before 9 o'clock this morning of emergency vehicles moving into the area, and there were countless emergency personnel in that area when first one of the World Trade Towers collapsed and then the second.
And the Pentagon took a direct, devastating hit also from an aircraft, and the enduring symbols of American power evacuated today as this apparent terrorist attack quickly spread fear and chaos in the nation's capital.
To our benefit here as opposed to the trade towers. I can't make an estimate, but fortunately the Pentagon is a very large building, so let's pray that that the extent of the casualties has been limited by that. Obviously there's casualties, but what staggers the imagination, as I heard you talking, is the 50,000 people that work at the trade towers. we pray for them and their families, and it's a tragedy that, again, words become inadequate very quickly when describing something of this nature. But I'm sure the President will lead us. I am sure that the President will reassure the American people, and all of us, all Americans, will commit ourselves to making sure that those who committed it pay the heaviest price, whether they be governments or individuals, including governments that may have harbored groups that were responsible for this, and we will make sure that there's never a reoccurrence. And I know that's no consolation to the grieving families, but I don't think we can do more, except I am confident the President of the United States will lead, and the American people can bestow their confidence upon his leadership.
Senator, what you're saying suggests, as others may have mentioned, that life in the United States will not again be the same anytime soon. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And again, it's incomprehensible and reprehensible, and none of us that I know of ever imagined something this enormity, and well orchestrated, obviously.
Senator, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Brett.
We now have Brian Wilson, I believe, able to report to us on what he's been hearing. He's up on Capitol Hill. Brian, what are you hearing, buddy?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of things, Britt. One of the things that we're hearing in the last few minutes is from Senator Richard Shelby, who is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who told us there has been no advance warning, and they call this very well organized, and he says that they had no advance warning that it was coming at all. And usually they do have some indication from the intelligence community, so very surprised. They say, of course, they know about what happened at the Pentagon. They know about what happened at the World Trade Center. They're still...
Once we know, a New York City police spokesman who did not want to be identified said that the loss of life would be in the many thousands. There's no reason to doubt that whatsoever.
None at all, Dan. And I guess a lot of questions. If the planes were indeed hijacked, how did they get the weapons on the plane going through the security that we have at the airports? A lot of questions that will have to be answered.
Well, again, anybody who's been in an American airport any time recently knows that how that happens is that many of the people who are supposed to be part of the security are napping. No one wants to say that, no one has wanted to say it, but here's a day in which, what else can you say? The alleged supposed security at our airports had holes that terrorists could literally drive trucks through. We've all known that for some time. That's not to assess blame on anyone. Sure. This is not a day for the blame game in any direction. It's a day to think about those people killed and injured in this cowardly sneak but devastatingly effective attack, and the families of those people. The CBS News affiliate in Cleveland has told us that the FBI is checking a Delta plane on the tarmac at a Cleveland airport. The significance of that, the possible significance, we can't possibly know, but that kind of thing is bound to be happening in airports all over the country today, given the situation that has developed. Now, the talk of Osama bin Laden, which we've had an awful lot of it today, again, we've made this point before, but we paused to do it again, that nobody knows who brought this attack on. What we do know is that Osama bin Laden, a Saudi multi-millionaire who has been protected and hiding out in Afghanistan for some time, that was his last known location, has been directly tied to the previous attack almost 10 years ago, not quite 10 years ago, on the World Trade Center. Osama bin Laden and his operation, no one can really say how big and widespread his operation has been. The picture created by intelligence operatives, many of them, has been, well, he has a worldwide network. Work around the world, including some state governments. There's been some criticism quietly from U.S. diplomats and intelligence operatives and some among our allies, that one of the things that nobody wants to face is that there is such a thing as state-sponsored terrorism, something over and apart from an outlaw such as bin Laden. And then there's questions raised about, well, what's bin Laden's relationship with the Taliban and Afghanistan, this radical fundamentalist government in Afghanistan. All of these questions have been in the atmosphere. They're in the background and part of the context of today's events. However, we come back to the central fact. Nobody knows who is responsible for this. Bob Schieffer talked about rage growing in the upper tiers of government and elsewhere in Washington.
Call, John Miller, that the attack on the trade towers in '93 was launched from New Jersey, or at least the operational headquarters of the people who attacked the Trade Center were in New Jersey.
Correct, and the building of the bomb and the original conspiracy was all carried out in towns right across the river. In fact, the conspirators later admitted that they watched from New Jersey to see if the buildings would in fact fall, and they didn't. This time they did.
They did today. And Governor Pataki trying, as politicians again must on occasions like this, trying to express the horror and the commitment that the political establishment feels to those people who have died and those people who need to be rescued. It's an answer to every question about whether or not something was locked down or something. He came back every time that their priority now is to try to help those people who are in deep and in some cases still desperate trouble. George Stephanopoulos, one of our senior reporters, is downtown. Hey, George, where have you been? What have you seen? What do you think?
Well, Peter, I'm going to give you kind of a pool report from several of our correspondents down here of basically what happened down here in downtown New York between 9:45 and 10:45 when the two explosions and the collapse of the World Trade Center happened. At the time, I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped. They then diverted us around the World Trade Center to Park Place, which is one stop beyond the World Trade Center. We got to that train station at around 10:35, Peter, and it was a scene unlike I've ever seen before in my entire life. As we tried to get out of the subway station and walk up into the street, it was pitch black, midnight black, snowing soot all down through downtown Manhattan. This was
communication between the aircraft that were hijacked and the Federal Aviation Administration. It appears that maybe there was just enough time to alert the military that some of these planes had been hijacked. There was not enough time, I know this for a fact, to notify the FBI and its hostage rescue team, which would ordinarily be deployed immediately. So it happened very quickly. The plane, for example, that struck the World Trade Center, we know left Boston. It immediately was diverted. It was outside of it.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Bob Fryer.
And I'm Jacqueline London. We are continuing to follow this morning's national tragedy. Of course, right now, new information continues to unfold right here in Central Florida.
From our airports to the theme parks and schools and to our military and, of course, the Space Coast, we need to begin right now with Jackie Calloway with the Orange County officials about to hold a press conference. On the phone. Jackie?
That meeting is getting ready to kick off here in downtown at the Orange County Administration Building just here in the next couple of minutes. We understand that leaders from throughout the county, including Richard Crotty, Mayor Glenda Hood, the police chief of Orlando, Sheriff Kevin Berry, the superintendent of schools, other emergency management officials are going to be gathering here, and we are guessing that they're going to be giving us their game plan. Although at this point, Orange County is not under any sort of official alert. Obviously, these people want to be prepared. They want to have some sort of game plan should that go to the next level. I've also been checking with other counties this morning, and Orange County is certainly not alone. Just got off the phone with officials in Lake and
dramatic footage. George Stephanopoulos made a reference to Pompeii near Naples on the west coast of Italy, which was, buried by a volcano, and you get exactly that same sense of freezing stuff in soot and dirt, as might have occurred by a volcano. Jim Kellstrom, with whom we're long familiar, former official of the FBI in the New York office, is on the air, very deeply involved in the Flight TWA 800 investigation. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What do you think?
Peter?
I'm listening, Jim. I
Yes.
just say, what do you think? I mean, just start and I'll...
Well, my first thought is with the tremendous casualties, and the death toll is just overwhelming. It's a day that 50 years from now, our children, if we're still teaching history, will be taught about when we went to war on American soil with terrorism.
Jim, have you had a chance to talk to your more active colleagues in the FBI at the moment about what they're doing at the moment, whether they're able to, I mean, it seems the hardest thing at the moment is to make an appraisal of all this. It just happened, and it's just, in some respects, it's happened and it's happening, right?
Peter, you're right. I mean, it happened. It's shocking, but in some ways it isn't shocking. I mean, we've had, you know, the hatred of America played out at the Trade Center in '93. They tried to take the Trade Center down. We've had the hatred played out in the USS Cole, the bombings of our embassies in Africa, the bombings of the barracks in Saudi Arabia. So now it's being played out big time here in the United States.
Jim, what is the principal goal of the FBI at a moment like this, when all of the emergency services are brought to bear in all of these locations? What's the FBI actually doing at the moment?
I think the first concern of the FBI right now, right this second, is there going to be something else happening in the next 5 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, 12 hours? Simultaneous with that, who did it? Where are they? What do we know? What's the intelligence base? Tell us. Why didn't we see this coming? Where do we go from here? What kind of articulate, defined information can we give the National Command Authority so that we can bring the necessary massive retaliation necessary without a lot of collateral damage?
Well, Jim, thank you very much for checking in with us, and please do at any time if you have news. That photo, that, as Jim was talking, Jim Kallstrom, the former director of the FBI here, and a major force in the investigation of TWA 800, which blew up off the south coast of Long Island.
And the principal operator in the first World Trade Center bombing. Key investigator.
Right. But it's interesting, forgive me, no offense intended him, he doesn't have much to say either today, because in some respects there isn't much to say except the horror of it. But as we were looking at just a moment ago, listening to George Stephanopoulos talking to our reporters who witnessed the horrifying jump of some people from the top of the trade towers, you just saw a hint of the just ahead of this little piece of video here before, you saw a hint of what people were enduring at the top of the trade towers before they collapsed as a result of the intensity of the fire. And we've seen it before in other places around the world. Fire starts in a place, people often, ironically, not that it would have made any difference today, do the wrong thing, they get trapped in an open window by fire coming into their room, and finally they just jump, simply because if they don't jump, they're probably going to be burned alive. But as we have heard from, it's interesting that Governor Pataki is so nervous, and I don't blame him for a second, wanting to stay away from the magnitude of the casualties here today. But as John McKenzie reported from the fire department downtown, we got 200 fire department officials, 200 firefighters missing. I don't know whether or not this is a firefighter who's been brought, but you see in every case people getting oxygen because it isn't if it isn't collapse that kills in some cases like this, it is the deadly smoke. Anybody who's been involved in a fire knows the deadly smoke which suffocates people.
Now on to Patrick Air Force Base. They are on high alert this afternoon, as you might imagine. Local 6 reporter Yvonne Martinez is there live. Yvonne.
Well, Jacqueline, when you talk about high alert, it doesn't get any higher out here. We are on threat condition Delta out here outside the main gates at Patrick Air Force Base, and all around, all the gates have been closed here. They have concrete barriers at the front, heavily armed guards at every gate out here. We are told that it is pretty much shut down out here. We do expect to get some more information a bit later on today as to what instructions have been given out here to this installation out here. It is Central Florida's only military installation out here, home to close to 12,000 military, contractor, and government civilian workers, including Cape Canaveral Air Force Station just north of here in Cape Canaveral. Again, threat condition Delta out here, the highest alert status out here at Patrick Air Force Base. They have been this way for several hours now in response to the goings-on in New York and around the country out here. We are going to continue to monitor the situation out here. We do expect to get some more word as to what instructions they have been given out here. We expect to have that for you later on today. We'll keep you posted. Right now, back to you guys.
All right, Yvonne, thank you.
All right, Disney official Diane Leder is on the phone with us right now for more information on the situation at the theme parks, the shops, and the hotels. Diane, thank you for joining us. Let us in on the Disney thinking here. At what point was the decision made to shut down?
Well, this was made a few short hours ago, and it's done as strictly as a precautionary measure. We are closing our theme parks, water parks, shopping areas, and recreation complexes. Our resort hotels, however, do remain open.
And these closures remain indefinitely?
That's correct. We will make a determination later in the day when we will reopen. But as I say, at this point in time, it's strictly a precautionary measure in the best interests of our guests and our cast members.
All right, Diane Leder, thank you very much for your time, Diane.
You're welcome.
All right.
Tarek Miner live now with the latest at Daytona Beach International Airport. Tarek, what can you tell us about
We're here at the Daytona Beach International Airport where more than 1,000 people have been affected by this apparent terrorist strike this morning. The FAA tower ordered all civilian airplanes to the ground, all military personnel into the air. We talked to several passengers here on the ground. It's been a morning of calling family and friends, making long-distance phone calls to trying to find out if everything is okay. Here at the airport, they've heightened up their security. They are threatening to tow cars that are in the way. They're looking for suspicious packages, looking for anything out of the ordinary. We talked to a passenger this morning who actually was supposed to be at work at the World Trade Center on the 34th floor. She was here in Daytona Beach visiting her mother who was sick. She was trying to call and trying to reach her friends, of course, to no avail.
Angle, you saw the plane hit one side of the building and then you saw parts of the other side of the building blowing out. So you can only imagine how far that plane traveled through the building on impact. And keeping in mind that we want to talk about the location here. Southern tip of Manhattan, Newark Airport, probably what, Tom, as the crow flies, 10 miles
maybe
to the west and south. Kennedy Airport, another 10 miles maybe to the east. LaGuardia Airport, just to the east as well and slightly north. So air traffic, obviously, it's a congested area, although that was restricted airspace. No planes fly that close to New York City.
Landing gear at the bottom is somewhere in lower Manhattan. It was December 7th, 1941, actually the next day that FDR said this is a day that shall live in infamy. We are living through another day of infamy for this country.
That was some videotape that was taken by our producer, our Dateline producer, Christian Martin, who was at the scene, Tom, right before that tower collapsed. I'm not sure if he was there before the first tower collapsed or the second tower. I believe it was the first tower. And as we saw, as you mentioned, airline debris, and apparently Christian saw some very grisly things on the scene.
Well, it turns out that President Bush has been diverted to Barksdale Air Force Base, which we believe.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mark Middleton in the News Channel 2 newsroom. We will stick with NBC's continuing coverage of this unprecedented terrorist attack, but we'd like to update you on several key local issues right now. Orange County.
Not yet explained, but no doubt will be explained. Flew from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana, and we're told that the president will make a statement from Barksdale Air Force Base shortly. We, of course, will carry that as part of our continuing CBS News live coverage. Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York with one of our most experienced and distinguished correspondents, Harold Dow, who was on scene down in the Wall Street area, came back here covered with soot, debris, smoke. We couldn't get a remote unit down in that part of the city to broadcast. Wouldn't have been a good idea to do it even if we could in retrospect. And Harold has come back to fill us in with eyewitness reports. We had Carol Marine came in earlier with moving and detailed, accurate eyewitness reports. As we contemplate all that, we go to Bob Orr in Washington with more information. Bob?
Yeah, Dan, we're getting some of the first official numbers in now from the airlines involved and from the FAA. United Airlines now is telling us on the two airplanes involved in the attack that were United jets, one being a 757 and the other a 767. There were 45 people on the flight from Newark to San Francisco, 45 people, total of passengers, pilots, and flight attendants. And on the 767 United flight, which left Boston bound for Los Angeles, we now understand there were 65 people on board that airplane. Now, the 2 American flights, and this information I will tell you comes from the Associated Press. American Flight 77, which was Dulles to Los Angeles, we now believe had 64 people on board, and the 767 from Boston to Los Angeles had 92 people on board. These were large airplanes capable of carrying more than that, but that is still a significant loss of life. In addition, the FAA has just told us a short time ago that there is now somewhat of a new concern. There are 22, we should say at least 22, international flights still in the air at this moment bound for the United States. There was some question about what should be done with those flights. The New York airspace is closed. The Washington airports are closed. Apparently now a decision has been made to allow the international flights to land. We're not sure exactly where. It is common when there are weather problems to divert those flights to either, say, Boston or Atlanta, even perhaps as far south as Miami. But I don't believe, from what we've been told, that they will be going into the New York or Washington area. In addition, there are also 50 domestic airline flights that are still in the air. These are planes that took off this morning during peak rush hour times and who literally were caught in the air when this terrorism attack unfolded. Even though the national aviation system has been closed down, those 50 planes obviously will be allowed to land, and the FAA says that it does not see any particular problem with that. One further point, picking up on something correspondent Jim Stewart said a while ago, the planes involved in the attacks this morning were widely used, readily accessible commercial airline planes, 757s, 767s, and these are fairly easy to fly. Now, I say that with the understanding that if you have a rudimentary knowledge of flying, certainly if you're militarily trained, even if you are a civilian pilot, even of moderate skills, these planes are relatively easy to fly. They can be difficult and touchy to land, but in a situation where we saw that they were used basically as flying bombs, it's not difficult for someone with some rudimentary skills to take the control and sadly steer that kind of an airplane into a building. I would agree with what Jim said earlier, and this is in the realm of just theory. Pilots have been through a number of their training programs, and I can't envision an airline pilot deliberately taking his plane into a populated area or into a large high-rise like the World Trade Center. He would, I think, in almost every circumstance, force the hijacker, if that's what it was, to take control in some kind of commandeer mode. We're still getting preliminary information from the FAA, but certainly as far as the people on board the airplanes, the death count is not as terrible as it might have been at first blush. We're still checking, Dan.
Bob Orr in Washington, you're looking at videotape of earlier this morning. You saw a terrible scene, never to be forgotten, haunting scene of bodies coming down the side of the World Trade Center building, one of them before both buildings collapsed. In one of the most audacious attacks ever against the United States, terrorists hijacked at least 2 airliners and crashed them into the World Trade Center in what appears to be a coordinated series of blows, the blows that brought down both of the World Trade Center 110-story towers. A plane also slammed into the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon, hit a helicopter pad, then we're told, and then set fire to portions of it. It brought the seat of the U.S. government itself under attack. There's never been anything like this in the history of the United States. This is something unique. Thousands of people are believed to be dead or injured. That's according to a high-ranking New York City police official who did not want to be quoted by name. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said, "I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost." That's a quote. And another quote, "Right now we have to focus on saving as many lives as possible." The incredible amount of debris, steel, concrete, plaster, and what have you, now envelops what were the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. In that debris, there may very well be some people alive at this moment. Efforts are being made to determine that. Authorities have been trying to evacuate those who work in this whole area of the Twin Towers. Many people are thought to have been trapped. About 50,000 people work at the Trade Center. American Airlines said that its 2 aircraft known to have been hijacked were carrying a total of 156 people. fate of those people unknown, but one has to believe that many, if not all of them, are dead. Chris Yates of Jane's Transport of London said this is perhaps the most audacious terrorist attack that's ever taken place in the world. Another quote from him: "It takes a logistics operation from the terrorist groups involved that is second to none," unquote. Now, Mr. Yates speaks of terrorist groups. There are those in diplomatic and intelligence circles who would believe that this kind of attack perhaps could not be coordinated and carried out on this scale without the help of some state governments, actual state governments. But that is, of course, speculation on their part. Nobody knows who brought this terror, this death and destruction, this horror to the United States. President Bush has ordered a full-scale investigation. By the way, we're told that the president will be speaking on videotape from a videotape made at Barksdale Air Force Base outside Shreveport, Louisiana. This is an unexplained situation, but understandably, the government doesn't want to explain everything they're doing and all the whereabouts of the president. The president was known to be in Florida earlier in the day. Then we got the report that he'd be speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base. Then we were told, well, he'd be speaking on videotape. To sort some of this out, our White House correspondent John Roberts is in Washington. John?
And was because, frankly, it just was not safe here, or even if it was safe, the Secret Service could not be assured of the president's safety. When I came into the White House this morning, the Secret Service at that point had not declared an alert, and within about 5 or 10 minutes of my arrival, suddenly they were evacuating the grounds, and then they decided to go beyond that and evacuate the building itself. After the twin attacks on the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, there had not been a national alert declared, but just about the time that I walked in the gate of the White House this morning, that other explosion occurred at the Pentagon, and that's when the Secret Service said, this is very serious. We're targeted here in Washington. We have to get everyone out. The Vice President and his staff, who were in the building at the time, were evacuated. They have been taken to an undisclosed location. We understand that the Vice President is with his wife, Lynn Cheney, as well. Louis Libby, his Chief of Staff, is with him, and Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor. They have established an off-campus situation room. There is a situation room, Dan, as you know, in the basement of the White House, in which the leaders of the National Security Council and the military meet anytime there is a potential for a national emergency, or anytime that there is a serious threat against American interests abroad. Because there is a plan here in Washington to devolve power from all of the agencies and departments.
I remember working with Diane on the Millennium broadcast on New Year's Eve 2000. Diane had such a joyful time in Times Square. It is, whatever you think of New York in general, it is a place where people from around the world gather to express themselves, and so we'll go back there on occasion to get some, you really get some sense of the world in Times Square. And President Bush has been on the phone today to a variety of world leaders, clearly discussing this with them at the highest possible level. And perhaps they're all as confused as the rest of us are as to what has happened, who perpetrated these acts of terrorism in the United States, and what is to be done in response. Though this is perhaps, we're only 4 hours since this actually happened, and perhaps it is not quite the time to begin to think about the precision of a response, but a response will be required of some magnitude that will mean something from the United States if one is ever able to pin down exactly who the perpetrators were. We told you that the president was in Florida this morning, where he'd intended to talk about education today and was coming back to Washington. He's made it as far as Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he landed about an hour and a bit ago, just before noon Eastern time, where he's made a statement to the cameras, which we haven't got our hands on yet. But the president said that freedom had been attacked, but freedom will be defended. And the president is in touch with his national security team. Ann Compton, ABC's Ann Compton, who covers the White House for us for many years from us, tells us that jet fighters accompanied Air Force One, and that as best we can tell, the Air Force One was flying at a particularly high altitude. There are no planes taking off or landing or taking off in the United States at the moment, with the exception of Air Air Force One, though the Federal Aviation Administration says at the moment that 50 known aircraft, this is actually a few minutes old, 50 known aircraft are all in the sky within approximately 50 miles of their destination. So you can feel across the country that aircraft that were in flight are beginning to settle down. They were ordered to settle down by the FAA and to land at the nearest possible airport. And so that has begun to work out. Now in Washington, I think Claire Shipman at the White House or near it has some further information about the president. Yes, Claire.
Well, that's right, Peter. Essentially, what we've learned is what he told the pool cameras a few minutes ago, and we're hopefully going to see in just a few minutes, but he said that he and this government have taken steps to ensure the functioning of the United States government, that the U.S. military is on high alert at home and abroad. He said he has taken all appropriate security measures to protect Americans. He says freedom itself has been attacked and freedom will be protected. And finally, he also said he will hunt down and punish those responsible for this. Again, we're hoping to see him in person, but as you mentioned, it looks as though this may be the secure place that they've decided on for the president, at least temporarily, Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I'd be really curious, Claire, and I realize how difficult it is at the moment, whether or not there's not pressure, political pressure in Washington from the members of the president's own staff and cabinet for him to show up soon in front of the country and assure them beyond his statement that freedom has been attacked and freedom will be defended, of course, because it wasn't defended this morning.
Well, I think
whether or not the president to be seen in command in a more vigorous way.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm sure it's a delicate balance right now between the Secret Service and those who are trying to protect the president, keeping him out of sight and someplace secure, and his political advisors who would clearly like to see him make a statement. You saw how quickly he did it this morning, as brief as it was, and certainly a piece of tape that we're going to see in a few minutes, we hope, is not what they would like to see the president doing right now. They would like to see him making something of a more formal statement. But again, it could be a number of hours before the president is back in Washington and prepared to talk to us from that forum.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. We'll come back to you anytime you want. And again, none of us should be surprised at what's happening. First of all, Secret Service is a huge, powerful, authoritative organization which takes the president's safety and other members of the senior political leadership with deep and profound seriousness, but they have enormous power. And so if you're talking between a senior political official and the president, a Secret Service official of equal stature at the moment, who's going to win that argument at the moment? And this is particularly true in a situation which continues to unfold, because while the devastation, perhaps the greatest devastation has occurred in New York City this morning, it's also occurred outside Washington at the Pentagon, and the tension is there all across the country, because not only were the United Nations and various government buildings evacuated here in New York City, but the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest skyscrapers in Boston and Cleveland and Minneapolis, Space Needle in Seattle. So the psychological effect on people in the country is huge. It may indeed be settling down after several hours, but the president and his response to this is also part of the psychological package, because the country looks to the president on occasions like this to be reassuring to the nation. Some presidents do it well, and some presidents don't. But ABC's Ann Compton is with the president at the moment, and we have her on the telephone. Annie.
Peter, it has been a frightening couple of hours for President Bush. We took off in Air Force One from Florida, where he first got word of this, and we literally, Peter, have been flying at well over 40,000 feet west, the White House unable to tell us where we were headed or how long it would take. There were jet fighters off the wing just out of our sight until we landed. And the president has spent the time on board the aircraft talking not only to world leaders but to the vice president, to his cabinet. He even checked in with Mrs. Bush, trying to get more information. We were high enough so that the Air Force was actually able to get some television signal. We don't know much about what's gone on the ground, but he has been able to see some of it on a very fuzzy television picture. We landed here at Barksdale Air Force Base. This is near Shreveport, Louisiana, at about 11:45 Eastern Time. We were not allowed to use cell phones or give you any indication of where we were until local people noticed the plane on the ground. The president has just made a statement, Peter, a very emotional one, saying that has been attacked, but freedom will be defended, saying that America's military is on its highest state of alert. World leaders have been assured that the U.S. will do whatever it takes to protect America and Americans. Frankly, Peter, I thought the president not only looked grim, very solemn, but his eyes looked somewhat red.
Annie, let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, the president was on a education trip, ostensibly, in Florida today. How much of the national security team was with him?
This is actually a skeleton team with him on a short, it was a trip that lasted only about 24 hours. He was just making his last appearance before returning to Washington. And Karl Rove, one of his senior counselors, is with him, and his press secretary, Ari Fleischer, but none of the national security apparatus, such as Condoleezza Rice, who would ordinarily travel with the president on a more substantive trip. But on Air Force One, of course, he has the full resources of communications. But he does not have the full team with him.
Well, let's talk about this for a second, because when the president took off from Florida and went immediately to 40,000 feet, and I believe actually got a fighter escort for part of the way, it reminds one a little bit of what it was like in the Cold War, because the Cold War, there was always a provision that the senior members of the government, president included, could in fact run the country from a command center in the sky. Is that basically what's happening this morning?
Absolutely. In fact, the U.S. used to have 5 aircraft, now Air Force One. Let me know if we're being taken out of here. We may be scrambled out of here.
Okay.
Are we leaving? Okay, Peter, we are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea. They have not told us. They have kept us. We don't even know whether we'll be able to see the president or travel with him, but we are told that he's been traveling. He will continue. They are still quite worried about his own security.
Off you go, and Ann, thanks very much for a very, very full report on the state of, and perhaps even a little bit of the mental condition of the president at the moment. And we cannot state it often enough. The country looks to him, and so he may have stopped at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, which is just where Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana all come together at an Air Force base out of the way, and he may be safe at 40,000 feet in Air Force One, but before long the country is going to expect him to be back in Washington to send, if not only a message, not just a message to those of us in the nation who look to the president for some sense of political national stability, but also to the other parts of the world where these enemies of the United States, with whom we've talked quite a lot about today, at the moment must surely think they have the United States on the run to some extent. And while the Taliban, the political leadership, political, military, religious leadership in Afghanistan said this morning that they condemned this and had nothing to do with it, and it could not have been Osama bin Laden, because he wasn't sophisticated enough to do it. It had to be a country or a government, certainly. And while the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, came out and put as much distance as they could between them and the Palestinian people, this acted in the Palestinian people, the president needs to be on station to talk it. As does the mayor of New York, and Mayor Giuliani is with us at the moment. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
I can, Peter.
Mr. Mayor, I saw you several times on the street today, and it looked like you were deeply sharing the horror that all of us feel. But I'd really appreciate, aside from, on top of your sentiments about all this, give us some sense of what's going on.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort. We have thousands of police officers and firefighters in all of Manhattan trying to rescue as many people as we possibly can. There are still a lot of people there that are injured, hurt, dazed, and we're trying to get them out, and we're mobilizing all of our...
Today, we've had a national tragedy.
Hijacked American Airlines planes crash into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, 2 symbols of America, with thousands of people inside.
In an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Good afternoon. We're interrupting ABC's coverage of this attack on America to focus on what's happening here locally. But first, here's what we know. United Airlines has now confirmed the crash of a second of its airliners this afternoon. One of its jets crashed this morning near Pittsburgh. The location of the second crash has not yet been released. A total of 5 commercial airliners have crashed, 3 of them used as suicide attacks on American landmarks. 2 of those hijacked commercial jets crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City this morning. Another airliner crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.
Now, shortly after the attacks, officials at Disney decided to close theme parks, and we are told that SeaWorld is closing its parks right at 1 o'clock as well. Channel 9 Eyewitness News reporter Christina Arangio is live with more on the decision at Disney. Christina?
Well, Marla, parkgoers are still in the process of leaving the 4 theme parks at Disney. That is, of course, Disney MGM Studios, Epcot, the Animal Kingdom, and the Magic Kingdom. The recreational complexes have been closed, so have entertainment complexes. The only thing that remains open are the resorts. Now, I'm standing along 535 at the intersection with the Crossroads Shopping Center, and this is a back entrance to Disney World. You go down this road here, you enter downtown Disney, but the traffic flow has been normal for the most part. I've been talking with a colleague of mine who was in the Magic Kingdom, who was making his way out like all of the park goers, and he says that everyone was moving in an orderly fashion, that security was escorting everyone out. Once he got into the parking lot for the Magic Kingdom, he says it was fairly empty. We should also note that he was given a one-day free pass to any park. Everyone leaving the parks was given a one-day free pass. Again, Disney is saying this is a precautionary measure. As far as we know, there have been no threats made against Disney World, but they do want to be careful, and so they are closing these parks. But again, the resorts remain open for now. Now, Disney is going to be making a comment about what they have done today in closing the theme parks, the recreational complexes, and the entertainment complexes, and we should have more for you later on. One other note, I've been talking with some of the tourists who've been walking around here, a family from New York who is obviously very distraught about all this, as we all are, saying that they are unable to reach family members, and we're hearing that from a lot of folks here that have not been able to reach family members on the phone. Just complete silence when they call New York. They are not aware of, the status of their family members, and they're very concerned. But for now, that is the latest here. We will continue to follow every development. We are live in Orlando. I'm Christina Arangio, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you, Christina. And once again, Disney closed. These are some lists of parks closed. Disney's resorts are open. Universal is open. SeaWorld has just closed. And we understand that the Holy Land Experience is also closed.
And Kennedy Space Center is now on its second highest security alert. Tours of the Kennedy Space Center are closed. Of course, airline traffic all over the country has been grounded since this morning. Orlando International Airport looks all but abandoned this afternoon. Channel 9 Eyewitness News reporter Tracy Grant is there with a live report. Tracy?
Bob, as you said, all of the planes are still grounded here at OIA. No one has any idea when they will be able to get out of here. Many passengers have been using this curbside checkout right here as a pickup point. They've had relatives and friends come to pick them up because they have absolutely no idea when they will be able to leave Orlando. Now, different airlines are telling people different things. One woman told us, American Airlines told her they wouldn't be able to rebook her for at least 3 days, while another family told us that America West put them on a flight for tomorrow. Whether that is a realistic estimation of when people will be able to finally start flying again.
South Tower incredibly collapsed. Then the North Tower, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center collapsed. And one pauses after you say that because, you know, it's almost unbelievable. And then there was a plane crash in Sussex County, Pennsylvania. That's in the Pittsburgh area. Now, Pentagon spokesman Glenn Flood is just now quoted as saying, and I quote him directly, that there have been extensive casualties and an unknown number of fatalities at the Defense Department. That's the first time they've confirmed that there have been casualties. We go to CBS News Pentagon correspondent David Martin, our national security correspondent. David?
Dan, over my shoulder you can see the fire engine still trying to put out the fire that began when the plane hit the building. If you were at a different location, you would be able to see that that plane cut into that building just like an axe into a birthday cake. This is the west side of the building. People who were working on the east side of the building say they had their windows blown out and they saw a fireball. This for the largest office building in the world. So this plane caused extensive damage. Now, eyewitnesses have described a plane which the FBI decided was a description of a commercial 767 airliner or a 757, which would be consistent with the report of the airliner being hijacked, the American Airlines airliner being hijacked as it was taking off from Dulles bound for the West Coast. No confirmation that that is what happened. As to extensive casualties, certainly anybody that was on board that plane could not have survived that crash, and anybody who was in the direct path of that plane when it hit the building could not have survived. from a different perspective, you can see that floors 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all collapsed in on each other. It is a sight which I'm sure nobody in their wildest imagination thought they would ever see.
David Martin at the Pentagon, our national security correspondent. Jim Stewart, one of the best reporters in America when it comes to this kind of situation, has been working this story from the very beginning in Washington, and has new information about the early reports of a plane crashing at or near Camp David, the presidential retreat outside of Maryland. Jim?
Dan, the FBI now is trying to sort together what has actually happened here and what they still don't understand. And what they do know has happened is, of course, 3 separate terrorist attacks in the United States: the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and some event that has occurred in Pennsylvania, including that affected a commercial airliner. Because of the proximity of that crash of the commercial airline in Pennsylvania to Camp David, there is a presumption by some in law enforcement that Camp David may have been the target of that attack. That, of course, was a hijacked commercial aircraft that we are told did not respond to repeated attempts to communicate with it either by the military or the FAA. Now, other things that the government is confirming at this hour: number one, they received no warnings. They had no hint of any attack against domestic targets in the United States. Number two, they have not received any claim for any of these attacks from anyone. And number three, although they have no evidence that this is the case, they are assuming and presuming that there could be additional attacks within the United States and are reacting appropriately. To do so, they have set up command posts, we are told, in Washington, in Phoenix, and in Los Angeles. Moments ago, the Attorney General of the United States returned from out of town. He was taken by an armored car convoy to the FBI headquarters. Would you ask him, please? Excuse me, Dan, we have a little bit of confusion here in our newsroom at the moment. I can also say that the intelligence community is now saying officially that they do believe that these attacks have the signature, as one official put it, of the Al-Qaeda organization. That, of course, is the terrorist organization that is under the control of Osama bin Laden. They said that is, quote, our lead theory. Dan?
Jim Stewart in Washington. Now at Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana, President Bush is about to come out. We believe this is live, although we've been told earlier that it'd be played on videotape. Here is the President.
I got inside.
Well, folks, it's live television in a situation like this. I know you understand that mistakes happen. To err is to human, but to really foul up requires a computer, and we've had some computer difficulty. We're going to once again try to bring you an.
Well, here we have a second pass. No luck. We're going to keep at this until we can hear what the president had to say. This scene is playing out, as we mentioned, Barksdale Air Force Base there in Louisiana. Air Force One did take off. It got the president out of Florida. It is, while it doesn't have any offensive weapons on board, it has a defensive attack deterrent in the form of chaff that can lead missiles astray. Let's listen again.
Faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
George W. Bush speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base, a secure location near Shreveport, Louisiana. And he is trying to reassure Americans that their government is up and running, that they themselves will be safe, and he called what happened today an act of cowardice. These are the times when presidents are tested, make no doubt about it. This is the largest crisis that any American president has had to deal with since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, obviously, and this will be a time when Americans will make a very firm, gut-level decision during this day, into tonight, and on into tomorrow and the days that come, as to the capability of President George W. Bush, as he will receive the support of the American people, almost reflexively rallying around the chief executive, as has been the case any time tragedy has struck the United States. Tragedy has not struck this country like this since Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Let's listen now to some of those who witnessed what happened today in New York.
I heard a very low plane, which usually does happen, but when I looked up, it was like I was actually gliding with it, and I saw it actually went straight into one of the Twin Towers. It was like it sunk right into the floor. It disintegrated instantly.
Can you tell us what kind of an airplane it was?
It looked like a huge 747. It was a big airline. It wasn't a small jet. It was a big carrier.
And you couldn't see anybody? Could you see a pilot or any such thing?
No, I actually it was like side by side. It was like I was right behind it. It was huge. I couldn't believe how low it was. I was telling my roommate, this plane is very low. And I actually saw it go straight into the Twin Towers. Like, why is he going into the building? It was like it was almost deliberately glided into the building.
Elena, where exactly do you live? Where did you see this from? Battery Park City?
No, I'm in the East Village on 13th Street.
And you then saw the plane go into the building, and I assume you saw the resulting...
You better believe it. I saw an explosion like I have never seen, and all I can say is those people, I don't know, but they're all definitely disintegrated. It was the most awful thing I've ever seen.
You could hear the rumbling. When you looked up, you could see the top of the building just crumbling. We all headed south, and you could feel the wind hitting you in the back because as the debris hit.
Really?
I just dove under a truck. Got buried in there for about 45 minutes. Eventually dug my way out. And you couldn't see. For blocks. I must have walked 6 blocks down.
Okay, thanks.
I work at the Port Authority bus terminal. We got the call immediately. We heard it. We piled in our cars. We came down to the World Trade Center. We started to help evacuation. As we were evacuating number 1, I don't know what happened. I was on the terrace, which is ground level, and all of a sudden we heard the building starting to come down. And the next thing I know, I was holding on to my commanding officer, and we found ourselves on West Street. How we got out of the building, I thought I was gone. And then we were trying to get people away when the second collapse occurred, and I dove under a truck. So I don't know how I'm here.
Did you help get people out?
Yes, we got many people out, yes.
What was happening with them?
We had an orderly evacuation. There were bodies coming down, but I think they were from the aircraft. I still don't know really what happened.
Okay. All right. Now we have reports of people jumping out windows. And
That happened.
Tell me.
But we don't know why or how, but there were people falling out of the sky.
How did you get back here alive?
I don't know.
I mean, did you bring an ambulance down? Or?
No, we walked out. Myself, my commanding officer, and one other police officer. We helped each other out, and then we carried a bunch of people that we found laying in the debris. There was complete darkness. We stumbled over some people. We picked them up and carried them across the street.
Now I can't see what floors they are, but
I can't see either. My eyes are all cluttered. I have to go. I'm going to hang in as long as I can.
I was standing on the roof of the Woolworth building on the 56th floor looking out the tower to see what happened, and the next thing I did, I seen a spot in the air. Another plane came down and circled. I kind of went off a little bit, and then it straightened itself out and dove to the other side and crashed right in. An explosion was so terrific it looked like it had dynamite in it. The ball of fire that came flying out of that one was even worse than the first one. And we were standing there, and I said, I can't believe this. And sure enough, there it was, another plane. The plane wasn't no airline or anything. It was a twin-engine, big gray plane.
And it was indeed, we've now learned, a commercial airliner, precisely that. And let's not forget, the aircraft that hit the World Trade Center were loaded with fuel. This had been the start and not the tail end of their flight. Some of them loaded with fuel for transcontinental air travel, which can reach into the tens of thousands of pounds. Both wings, much of the fuselage, laden with fuel. These are the commercial airliners that are down. Again, any one of these flights, obviously, painfully obviously, would be a huge tragedy on any other day. Today, in the midst of all these attacks on American targets, we are talking about 4 commercial airline flights down. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston LAX, American Flight 77, Dulles LAX, United 175, Boston LAX, United 93, Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. There will be so much discussion coming out of this today, and this is just one of those flights. Look at the severe turn it takes. This was the American Boston LAX flight. Everything was going well. This even gives us, this Flight Explorer website gives us airspeed, altitude. They were exactly where they were supposed to be for a flight out of Boston, headed on a transcontinental route, when they took this sudden turn, heading to the city of New York. And as far as the passengers knew, they did not know what their destination would be, only apparently that they had been hijacked. We have so much information we've yet to gather today. Communication, perhaps, between the towers and the TRACON regional flight controllers in this country, the towers at regional airports. We have a lot we don't know. Was there contact? Were all the pilots overpowered and replaced with terrorist pilots in the cockpits of these commercial flights? The sight of a commercial airliner running into the second of 2 twin towers in New York, beyond extraordinary, beyond horrifying. That is why the death toll in New York at this hour is believed to be measured in the thousands. We will be hearing from New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani in the next few minutes, a press conference we will bring to you live. Before then, let me go to my colleague Rick Sanchez, who all morning long has been reporting from Lower Manhattan. Rick, set the scene for us.
Right now, this is what it looks like down here, Brian. A lot of soot, a lot of ash. The closer you get to the area, the thicker it gets. A very difficult task for firefighters and some of the rescue workers who are just now starting to make their way into the rubble. They have called out all the local unions in this area. I've seen and spoken to the stagehands union, iron workers, all of them heading into the area in row with pickaxes and chainsaws. They have been waiting some time to finally go into that area to see if they can possibly extricate some of the people who may still be stuck in there. Firefighters are obviously going in with a heavy heart. Every one that I've spoken to says, those are my brothers down there. Those are my colleagues. So that's their task at hand right now as they move into that area. There is also a medical triage center that has been opened over at Chelsea Piers. Originally, they had plans to have it over near the high school, but now it's been moved several blocks away as well. The situation here obviously very tense. A lot of people extremely emotional about what's going on.
Rick Sanchez, thank you for that report from New York. And for those of our viewers not in the New York metropolitan area, words almost don't do the job in describing this city in complete emergency today. There were people streaming into the streets. All they knew is they should walk north, and walk they did, along venues and avenues like the West Side Highway in New York. They were being chased in some instances by this plume of dust that occurred not once but twice with the collapse of both of the towers in order of the World Trade Center. There were people praying on street corners in New York, trying to make cell phone calls, not knowing that the cell phone system had long since collapsed under its own weight and because of the outage of communications. There were people obviously walking around dazed, stunned, crying. People in New York all morning have been trying to get to their children, ensure their safety. New York City schools saying the children will indeed be safe and can only go home with a parent or legal guardian. This has brought families not only, of course, in front of their television sets, as few American tragedies have, but this has sent parents scurrying to check on the safety of their children. And the most horrifying aspect of it, perhaps, was that period of several hours this morning where we didn't know what would be struck next. I don't suppose it is fair to say that any threat has passed either at this hour, given what we have seen unfold in this nation so far today. And this is part of what we're talking about. Earlier today, 2 Navy FA-18s were seen coming down the Hudson River on patrol. This is a live picture. This is from the roof of this television network. Right now, a swept-wing U.S. Navy jet fighter is in the skies over the city of New York. In a free nation, this is not a sight people are used to. Chris Jansing, what are you seeing up on the roof?
Well, the first thing that happened, Brian, was that obviously we heard a plane overhead, and you start because of what happened earlier today. But it's almost eerie up here on the roof because we're not far. We're probably only about 10 miles southwest of us is Newark International Airport. We're used to hearing and seeing planes in a flight path over in this direction. All throughout the day, we see the planes coming and going. Today, an eerie silence, and then suddenly we saw those surveillance planes in the sky over metropolitan New York. We are being told that at Newark International Airport, which of course is where one of those ill-fated planes, the United Airlines Flight 93, left from at about 8 o'clock this morning, there are heavily armed guards. They are guarding the Port Authority offices. That's what controls Newark International Airport. They are also controlling the air traffic control tower there. We are told that those officers are on a high state of alert and they are carrying guns. Obviously, Newark, one of 3 airports here in the metropolitan area that is now shut down. And if we go back over in this direction and take the shot over my shoulder, you can see, even though we're probably a good 8 miles away from the World Trade Center, you can see the smoke that continues to billow out of lower Manhattan. We've been watching it over the course of the last 45 minutes or so. It's been changing from white to gray to black. And to give you an idea of the enormity of the disaster that has occurred in New York, hospitals all throughout New Jersey are on alert. In Hoboken, which is right across the Hudson River from what you're seeing right now at the World Trade Center, 12 people brought to the emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital, 30 more to the ER at Christ Hospital. St. Francis Hospital in Jersey City, not far from there, has taken another 20 people. And as far away as an hour from New York City, a hospital called the Robert Wood Johnson Trauma Center, that is in New Brunswick. They have doctors and nurses coming into their trauma center. They are on a state of alert. They have been told to prepare for at least 50 of the injured to come in. Now, obviously, the people who are being brought here over the river are not among the most seriously injured, although many of them have some pretty severe respiratory problems. None of their injuries is considered life-threatening. In addition, at the PATH station in Hoboken, again, directly across the river from Manhattan, there's been a triage center set up. So that's where some of the people are being brought. They're being assessed. Those who can be treated on the scene are being treated on the scene. Others are being sent to these hospitals that are on alert throughout New Jersey. Brian?
Chris Jansing, thank you from the area where this network is located. And by the way, you are watching continuing NBC News coverage here on MSNBC live throughout the day of the tragedy, the series of attacks that has taken place here in the United States today. President Carter has put out a statement calling for Americans to rally around the current president, Mr. Bush. Mr. Bush has spoken to cameras and is now on the move once again from Barksdale Air Force Base, apparently in Louisiana. And how often have we ever said this about an American president? Again, reminiscent of Dallas in 1963. His destination is unknown. The news media are not being told where Air Force One will head next. No doubt the Secret Service and the military are trying to decide the next best secure location. The Vice President and First Lady were removed by the Secret Service and taken to a secure location earlier today, as were congressional leaders, as a complete atmosphere of crisis enveloped much of the East Coast. The two important and large cities involved in this attack, of course, today, New York and Washington, D.C. We are joined by a witness who saw the second aircraft hit the World Trade Center towers today, Robert Harper of New York. Mr. Harper, tell me what you saw and experienced.
Yeah, good afternoon, Brian. I'm outside of the Metropolitan Hospital. I've just been released for some of the trauma associated with the smoke inhalation, and I was down below the World Trade Center when you could see the second plane circle around after the first initial blast from the first plane, and then the other plane, people were sitting around looking up. You could see, that the first plane had hit there, so people were going around trying to do whatever they could. You saw people jumping out of the 78th, 80th floor window of the World Trade Center, and then the second plane crashed into it and exploded into a ball of fire, sending debris, and everybody just began running. I started running toward the mayor's office at that point because there was debris flying everywhere. People didn't expect that to happen. People didn't understand why the plane circled the World Trade Center at that point and then just crashed right into it.
What was happening? Tell us about the scene on the streets. We were talking about people crying in the streets, praying, running through the streets of this city of New York.
Yeah, Brian, it was a complete nightmare. I mean, you saw thousands of businessmen in suits running away from the scene, people that were trying to help one another, people rallying around, victims that were on the ground. And then by the time the second plane actually hit the building, that plane exploded into the building, and the second World Trade Center exploded, and then there was debris coming down everyone. Everybody began to run immediately, and there had been some ambulances that had come to the scene, within minutes of the first accident or the first plane hitting the building. And so those people were all put in jeopardy because they were congregated down below the building. And then when the plane hit the second building, everybody below was put in jeopardy again. So it's very clear that this was well orchestrated. It was timed so that there would be the most number of casualties. There were, lots of people on the scene. The New York City marshals and police department responded very quickly to this, so they were all down at the bottom of the building. And then, the other plane and all the other debris came down. Within about 20 minutes after that, there was some feeling that they weren't sure if the other World Trade Center would continue to stand. And then about 30 minutes after that, as we were being treated on the side of the streets, they said, get up and run, because now the building itself was actually going to fall. And At that point, I was closer to the building that was located not too far from that. It was the Woolworth building, and they thought that one of the World Trade Centers would fall and hit the Woolworth building, and that was immediately in front of the mayor's office. And so everybody just began to run. There was black smoke. You couldn't see with your hand in front of your face. Everybody was covered in a complete complete soot, black everywhere. There are people, running across the Brooklyn Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, afraid that if the Woolworth building were hit by one of the other falling World Trade Centers, that triple domino effect, would end up killing even more people.
Robert Harper, thank you very much for that firsthand account of the grisly scene in Lower Manhattan today. We have a few items here. We've been searching for why this date, why today. This date coincides with the start of the Camp David peace talks during the Carter administration. This date also coincides with the event involving Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, who reached an agreement at the White House during the first Clinton term, now 8 years ago. The famous speech, the now long since assassinated Mr. Rabin, talking about his beloved land of milk and honey in Israel. But those are two dates that stand out. There is a Reuters news agency report. We're going to be very careful here because this is a nation anxious to point a finger of blame, anxious to have a villain by name per se. It's a Reuters report that is quoting an unnamed U.S. official saying some indications, reading this verbatim, people with bin Laden links behind attacks. Again, here's the quote. U.S. official says some indications people with bin Laden links behind attacks. We hesitate to pass this along. It is early. It is sketchy. Obviously, many people zeroing in, as did at least one of our on-air analysts earlier today in our programming, on Osama bin Laden, the best known, some would argue the best equipped of the major terrorists and leader of cells out there, with whom the U.S. has had much history. The bombing of the warship Cole overseas most recently comes to mind. It wouldn't hurt to repeat some facts about the World Trade Center at this point. We have this new live shot of Lower Manhattan, Woolworth building there on the left. Who would have thought it would be the tallest structure left in Lower Manhattan this afternoon? 50,000 people work in the two World Trade Center towers. I said this earlier, bears repeating, there are more telephone exchanges in just those two buildings than there are in the entire city of Detroit, Michigan. They were completed in 1976, 110 floors each. At least one New York television station went immediately off the air when the plane hit, because the broadcasting tower still services several stations, radio and television, from the top of the World Trade Center. That is, of course, no more. Stations will have to, locally in New York, go back to using the Empire State Building, perhaps. 43,000 windows in the structures, 99 elevators, 1,350 feet tall. For a good long while, they were the tallest structures in the world before being surpassed out in Chicago. Our own Ashley Banfield is in Lower Manhattan and joins us live to set the scene there. Ashley?
Brian, I'm talking with Anthony. He's just telling me the story of what happened to him. He's looking for his brother at this time. You were in the South Tower, and your brother works in the North Tower. And what if emergency personnel told you? How are you trying to locate your brother?
He could be anywhere right now. And we went to Beekman, or the old Beekman. Now we're on our way to St. Vincent's Hospital.
Did they send you to St. Vincent's Hospital to try to look for lists, or what did they do?
There's no list. No one answers the phones. Nothing. Nothing at all. So we're going to walk there. My mom is waiting, and I'm going to take her to St. Vincent's.
What did you see in the epicenter when you came out of that explosion?
People. I seen people falling. When the second explosion came, I was on the 44th floor walking from one elevator bank to the stairway, and that's when the plane hit, and all the elevator banks blew. And I went down, and people got hit with pieces of glass. And that's right after they announced that, right before that, they announced number 2 building is secure. We can go back to work. And as soon as they said that, that's when the second plane hit. And we started running down the steps. And
You've not been able to call your brother's cell phone, your mother as well?
My mother's over there right now.
All right, 877 Red Cross, good luck to you. And I wish, it's Jimmy, right? Your brother's Jimmy?
Yeah, his brother's name's Jimmy.
Good luck to you. This is some of the kinds of stories that we've been hearing since this happened. Brian, there is so much mayhem and so much bedlam that a lot of the police and emergency response crews have only just been able to try to secure the areas, let alone deal with so many of these casualties. I've heard the term walking casualties. We're just allowing the walking casualties to go to staging areas. I've been told there are 4 different staging areas, the largest of which is over at Chelsea Piers, which is on the Hudson River, on the west side of Manhattan Island. If you want to look past me with the camera here, you can still see the immense amounts of smoke all the way down. We've been pushed about 3 different times out of locations, moved northward from that vicinity. At the very start of the day when this happened, we were right in the epicenter where the explosion was. I'm right now covered in the debris and the dust from the explosion itself. I was hit with a cloud of debris and smoke. A producer I was working with, we at first had to kick in a door to an apartment building just to escape the clouds because we couldn't breathe, and a police officer followed us in because he couldn't breathe, and a security guard followed us in because he couldn't breathe either. It was pitch black, and now it's just trying to establish whether it's safe enough to even get the crews into this epicenter to rescue those who might still be there, like Anthony's brother Jimmy. He says he can't find him. He has no idea where to even look for him. He was in the first tower. The other thing I want to tell you about is just earlier, this is a sort of an emergency route. They've cordoned it off, and they're allowing a lot of the emergency vehicles to run north and south through here. We saw a caravan of 5 trucks, all with medical supplies, coming right past us and heading down towards the epicenter. Again, the concern is getting those things in there. If you want to just pan up, I don't know if you can see past me, let me get out of the way. Pan up to that big brown building where you can see most of the smoke. That is 7 World Trade Center. Apparently on the south side, that's the side that's not facing us, it's about halfway up. It's still burning pretty badly because it was rocked with a lot of the explosion from the force of the twin World Trade Centers when they came down. A large concern is what's going to happen with that brown building now, which is why we keep getting moved further and further north. You can see people down on the street moving towards us, even media who originally were allowed to have more free reign to report this story. We're being pushed out as well because there was some concern that there might be additional explosions, possibly other bombs. There was also some talk about gas, whether that was a gas explosion, a gas bomb, or perhaps just Con Ed's difficulties in dealing with some of the natural gas here. We're not sure yet. It's very, very difficult to get the emergency crews to give us this information because obviously they've got a very big problem on their hands, just trying to get people out of here and then of course deal with not only those who are still trapped possibly, but those who are injured. Apparently down this street here, and we're on West Broadway and Worth Street, there's another staging area where some of the victims are being taken as well. Ambulances have been coming and going, and we've seen a lot of city buses, we've seen Port Authority, we've seen just about any kind of organization getting involved in this tragedy to help out. Port Authority workers serving as traffic police. We've seen New Jersey police officers and fire and rescue teams coming in as well. We've been told that every county surrounding the New York area, as well as the surrounding states, have sent in emergency crews as well. Let me hear what they're saying. Sir, what's the situation at this time? Do we know anything more about other bombs?
Right now, we don't know anything right now.
And where are you being told to move people?
Yes, we are. I'm telling everybody because right now we're worried about the 3rd building right now.
You're worried about which building?
3rd building, which might be the American Express building.
Is it this brown building right here?
I don't know if it's the other side of the brown building right now.
And what's the concern with it? We've heard it's on fire on the other side?
Fire on the other side, which might cause the building itself to fall over and knock that building down. We also have to worry about the gas leaks and everything.
Now, what about the emergency personnel who are on the scene? Are they safe? Are they still trying to tend to the wounded, or are you getting all the emergency personnel out of the epicenter?
Basically, what you hear is what we hear also. Right now, nobody's told us anything.
And are you serving as traffic now, just trying to keep people out?
Clear people out. God forbid something happens. We don't want nobody, no more injuries or whatever.
Yeah. And how about your fellow officers? Do you know other fellow officers who were in there?
No, we don't. No, we don't. Right now, we're in the dark just like you are.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. There you go. I think that's probably best reported right from the officer's mouth. They're in the dark too, and that's what I've been hearing from almost every police officer that I've stopped to talk to. Brian, tell me anything, and they're told all I know is what I'm being told, to move people.
All right, Ashley Banfield, thank you for that live report from Lower Manhattan, just blocks away from where the explosions took place after again both World Trade Center towers.
But nothing, no specific information, no warning of any kind. And I've checked both with the police department and the FBI, and they had no warning.
Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, I appreciate you speaking to us live on the telephone as we played some video.
I would just like to say to the people of New York and to the people of America that this country, the city of New York and the United States of America is much bigger and greater than this, and we're going to overcome this. We're going to get through it. We're going to overcome it, and we're going to prove that democracy and law is our future, not this kind of vicious, horrible, inhumane kind of terrorism.
Mayor Giuliani,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Dateline's Freeport, Louisiana, Barksdale Air Force Base. Air Force One is reported to have taken off from Barksdale Air Force Base, where we played a videotape of what the President had to say there a short while ago, for, we're told, points unknown. Now, to bring you up to date quickly on what's happened, particularly for those of you who may be joining us late or just tuning in, plane crashed into one of the World Trade Center towers in Lower Manhattan shortly before 9 a.m. this morning. Second plane crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center shortly after 9 a.m. President Bush was in Sarasota, Florida, called the crashes at that time an apparent terrorist attack and a, quote, national tragedy. Then an aircraft of some kind crashed into a helicopter pad at the Pentagon, damage, including some fatalities there. The Pentagon, of course, just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. That was about an hour after the first planes, plural, crashed into the first towers here in New York. The Federal Aviation Administration shut down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. One World Trade Center tower then collapsed shortly after 10 a.m., about an hour after being hit by the plane. American Airlines said one of its planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11, hijacked from after takeoff from Boston en route to Los Angeles. Senior law enforcement officials said a car bomb exploded outside the State Department. Then later, senior federal officials said, well, no, that they might have been wrong about that. There was a report of a plane crash in the area of Camp David, the presidential retreat in rural Maryland. The facts on that have never been quite squared. And then there was what was described as a big plane crash, a strange one, near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All those have been the events of this day so far. No one doubts that the casualties are extremely high in the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings. You just heard live on the telephone, Mayor Giuliani did not even want to speculate how many, but when the thousands were mentioned, he just said he didn't want to contemplate that the loss of life has to be high. How high, no one knows in the crash of these World Trade Center buildings.
And welcome back to Local 6's continuing coverage of America Under Attack. We are going to break away just for a moment from our national coverage for a couple of minutes to bring you the latest here at home.
Local 6 has learned that the State Department issued a website terrorist alert to U.S. citizens abroad just a few days ago.
Mike Holfeld is developing that story and more in the Breaking News Center right now. Mike.
Thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. Listen, we were trying to develop this to make sure it was legitimate. We pulled it from the web. Indeed, it is. A call from a veteran pilot led us to this information last Friday, September 7th. A worldwide caution was issued by the U.S. Department of State. Now, I'm going to start quoting. First, over the last several months, the U.S. government has learned that U.S. citizens and interests abroad may be at risk of a terrorist action from extremist groups. Now, it goes on to refer to unconfirmed reports that actions may be taken, and this is important, taken against U.S. military facilities frequented by U.S. personnel in Korea and Japan. There is reference to groups with links to Osama bin Laden. Although intelligence reports didn't point to an attack on U.S. soil from what we've looked at so far, clearly there was concern. Quoting again, U.S. government facilities worldwide remained at a heightened state of alert. Remember, that's issued Friday, 4 days later, this American tragedy. Very quickly now, we're told astronauts in the space station can actually see the plumes of smoke from the rubble that was the World Trade Center. Locally, very quickly for you, Orange and Seminole County schools remain open. If you wish to get your children out early, obviously you have that option. The state's university system shut down. Tolls have been waived on Florida Turnpike and Alligator Alley because of the Disney decision to shut down its theme parks. Let's show you that video if we may. Disney making that decision. Also, I'm told Holy Land theme park closed. We just got word a few moments ago Universal has shut down. We've also checked with schools across Central Florida. Officials say they, of course, on a heightened state of awareness. And again, we want to emphasize, parents, if you want to get the kids out early, you certainly may. That is your option. Again, all state colleges and universities also closed for the day. Barry University released classes at about 12:30. So that's the very latest. Let's go back to you.
He mentions that that warning. It's sad to say we live in a world where you're always on the alert, I suppose, for terrorist attacks, but hard to imagine that anything like this could have happened. Thank you, Mike.
We've also just learned that Governor Jeb Bush will address the state in a televised address that is slated for 3 o'clock this afternoon. Orlando Mayor Glenda Hood and Police Chief Jerry Deming spoke very briefly a short while ago outside Police Department headquarters.
We understand that they are now meeting to devise emergency plans for the city, but they wanted to make a quick comment to let everybody know that they believe that we are safe here.
I want to assure you that here in the city of Orlando, we are doing everything prudent to make sure that we're monitoring the situation nationwide. We're working very well with all of the other government agencies locally at the state level and at the national level.
Police say they have received no threats in the Orlando metropolitan area, but they are on a heightened state of alert.
That's right. Now, Orange County Chairman Richard Crotty, he just addressed people as well, saying that he is confident that officials do have the situation under control. That's what he said.
And the message that we have for the citizens today is that we are not in imminent danger in Orange County, that we need to be very calm about the situation that exists. We are sensitive that a lot of our residents in Central Florida may have loved ones in New York, and we're certainly urging prayer for our nation, prayer for those involved in the various incidents in Washington and New York, but that we in Orange County are on top of the situation here.
Now, we certainly have never seen anything the likes of this before. It's an unprecedented event here, what's going on in New York. Donald Forbes is on the phone where, talk about unprecedented, he's just learned the security at the Kennedy Space Center has been upgraded to a like they'd never seen before.
That's correct. For the first time ever, they have gone to ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest state of alert that you can go to here at the Kennedy Space Center. They have closed the Kennedy Space Center in what they're calling an orderly evacuation of the Kennedy Space Center. That's 12,000 plus employees that have been asked to pack up whatever they were doing, finish whatever they were doing, get in their cars and go home. The last time the center was closed was due to Hurricane Floyd. So in essence, everything is closing down here. The VAB has been cleared. The ONC building will be closed down by 3 o'clock. The visitors complex is closed as well. We told you earlier that the buses were no longer running. Now, employees of KSC will be asked tomorrow to begin calling a special hotline that they will get the number to see if they are to return to work. But once you leave the Kennedy Space Center today, you are not going to get back on unless you have special permission to be here. From what we understand, they're going to have a staff of about 200 people that will stay here and monitor from an emergency operations center that they have set up here. We also understand other NASA centers are closing or have been closed. That includes the Johnson Space Center, of course, in Houston. Now, we talked to the Kennedy Space Center people just a few minutes ago, and they say they have no indication of any kind of threat to KSC, but they do consider this to be very serious, and they are not going to take any chances. Of course, they have a fleet of national assets right here at KSC in Brevard County. We're talking about the 4 orbiters are situated right now here at KSC, so the chopper is up and flying. They have their security forces. We're trying to find out as well, now that they've gone to ThreatCon Delta, if they're going to bring in additional military personnel to try and guard the base as well. Again, the first time ever that they have gone to ThreatCon Delta. You may have heard a minute ago Mike Holfield talking about it. It was Frank Culberson up in ISS. He said they were passing over Maine, and he said he saw the plumes of smoke from 250 miles above the Earth. He could see the smoke rising from New York City. That gives you some kind of indication of just how massive an explosion that took place there in the heart of New York City, Manhattan.
And Donald,
that's the latest from KSC right now.
And Donald, as you're speaking, we are watching those thousands of employees as they make their way out of KSC. Thank you, sir.
All right, hard to fathom this is going on. All air traffic nationwide has been grounded. No flights will take off until further notice, echoing what National has been saying. Mike DeForest following the latest now live at OIA. Mike.
Jackie, no flights in or out of OIA at this time. We are told by an airport employee that airport officials are meeting at this moment to discuss whether to close the airport entirely. Now, that has not been done since Hurricane Floyd either. As for right now, there are still some people out here here waiting for rides. Police officers have been making sure cars are moving throughout the circle, not allowing any cars to stop unless they are loading or actually loading passengers to get them out of here. Both of the on-property parking lots have been shut down. Bomb-sniffing dogs have been examining all the cars out there. But right now, OIA is next to shut down because no flights are coming in and out of here. If you do have concerns about the airline, you are asked to call that airline yourself or stay tuned here. Reporting live at OIA, Mike DeForest, Local 6.
All right, good information to know, Mike. Thank you.
Of course, these shockwaves, or explosions rather, sent a shockwave across the country. People gathered at their televisions all over the area to watch this tragedy unfold. Jennifer Wang is live with reaction. Jennifer.
Well, as you can imagine, everywhere downtown, every office building that has a television is tuned into the tragedy that's unfolding, and people can't seem to pry themselves away from the TV sets. Most of them have been watching since just after 9 o'clock when 2 airplanes hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. All of them are in shock, and they're shaking their heads in disbelief as they find out throughout the day that more and more disasters are happening in other parts of the country. Now, the office buildings are also taking their own safety precautions. They are shutting down all but one entrance over at the Landmark Center. That's also where the local offices of Morgan Stanley Dean Witter is located. They have closed their doors and refused to speak or speculate about how their colleagues may be doing in New York City. Their world headquarters were located in
accident. And then when we heard that a second plane, and you could see it flown deliberately into the World Trade Center, the horror of this terrorist war began to unfold, and it continues to unfold here now almost 5 hours later. And we'll be continuing to cover this across America and in the nation's capital. NBC's Pat Dawson has been not too far from the World Trade Center throughout most of the day, where it has been chaotic and terrifying. Pat?
Tom, as you point out, we try not to exaggerate very much in this circumstance, and yet in many ways it's hard not to exaggerate just the things we have been seeing and the things that we have been told. I think it is fair to say that the task that now confronts rescue workers here is Herculean, a very, very difficult task, and it is of 2 parts. It has been about 3 hours since what we might call the last catastrophic incident in a morning of catastrophes. That is since the North Tower of the World Trade Center, which used to stand behind me just about 10 blocks south, right below there. It used to tower above the buildings, which you can see, and obviously it is no longer there, nor is the South Tower. 3.5 hours since that happened. There have been no catastrophic incidents since then, but it has affected the rescue effort clearly because they are afraid of what could happen, what still might happen, since there were a sequence of catastrophes, if you will. That has made the rescue very, very difficult. At this point, we are being told unofficially that there may be as many as 200 to 300 rescue workers who are actually down there. We have seen pictures of some of them. They are down around the base of this building. They are beginning the, again to use that word, Herculean task of trying to find the people who might be alive in that debris. We know that there are a great number of people who are dead in there, unquestionably. What they are hoping to find is survivors, and at this point they really can't speculate on how many there are, how many there could be, and I don't think it really serves us at this point to speculate on the numbers that it could be. One of the tasks, though, is to try to get this rescue effort in its entirety going, and as you can see behind me down here, there are probably hundreds of New York City and New York State and federal rescue people who are involved, fire, police, emergency service, quite a few. In addition to those, the task is certainly aided by the American Red Cross's disaster relief teams. They are here on the scene. This is Frank Donahue, who is with the American Red Cross. Frank, tell me first of all, as you start out here, what is it you're trying to do?
Well, our immediate purpose is to kind of assess what role the Red Cross can play initially, and certainly it's to help the emergency medical people that are here provide any kind of relief and support we can for them. People being evacuated from neighborhoods need a place to go, and the Red Cross is setting up service centers and shelters. There's one at Grand Central Station and Penn Station. And then the blood supply, making sure we have a safe blood supply, not only here, but throughout the country.
Do you have any idea, have you heard, how many casualties have been dealt with so far?
No, I have not. I'm sorry, I have not heard that.
Is it, now part of your task, though, is also to provide blood supplies. Obviously, that will be needed in huge amounts.
Absolutely, and people throughout the country are responding. They should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It's important to note that this incident, and you know, there's blood needed here in Altoona, there's blood needed all throughout the country that's been affected by this disaster. Another part is people that are moving around, are traveling today. No airport in this country is open. And so Red Cross volunteers are in every airport providing assistance to families. Families are calling the Red Cross here in New York as they are calling their local Red Cross to try to communicate and find the well-being of people that were in this building, as well as people in the other affected areas. So
you were also telling me about grief counseling and dealing with people who've been traumatized around the country, maybe at other airports.
Absolutely. Boston, for example, LAX, where those airplanes were coming from and headed to, we have Red Cross mental health worker volunteers there that are providing assistance to families. And again, that's happening throughout the country where people have been affected by this disaster. Here in New York alone, the Greater New York Red Cross has had lots of experience at the World Trade Center a number of years ago. Today, there's about 1,200 local Red Cross volunteers here in New York providing food and shelter, direction, and support to people that are incredibly affected by this incident.
And how many Red Cross workers do you think around the country?
Oh, a number of thousand, a couple thousand for sure. I know in Philadelphia, where I came from, we're on standby working with emergency management. It's the same thing in every major metropolitan area that Red Cross workers work closely with emergency management.
Frank, thank you so much for taking some time out. We appreciate it. That was Frank Donahue, the American Red Cross. Tom, that brings you pretty much as much information as we have here in what remains a fairly chaotic situation. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pat Dawson. As the shock begins to wear down, we're going to all of us are going to have our patience tested as well as we await these reports. We'll try to deal with it as factually as we can. It does now appear that the wave of attacks is over. We could not be certain of that just a few hours ago, as there were these reports of planes that were still in the air, some that had been hijacked, and their destinations were uncertain at that time. This is a live picture of Lower Manhattan, missing two of its most familiar profiles, obviously. The twin trade towers of the World Trade Center, iconic buildings here in New York, really representing, symbolic, if you will, of the enormous economic strength of this country. They sustained an attack in 1993. They were reopened. The country came back from that, and we went about our merry way again, thinking that in Fortress America, this couldn't possibly happen. But of course it has. Neil Livingston is one of the most widely recognized experts on international terrorism. Mr. Livingston, we keep coming back to the same issue. This was a very sophisticated attack. This was not just a lone suicide bomber of some kind. 4 hijacking simultaneously. Obviously someone in the cockpit who knew how to get the plane to the targets that they wanted to get them to. And it had to have happened over a long period of time, and they were all transcontinental flights loaded with fuel.
Tom, this is our worst case nightmare scenario, the one that we've hoped would never happen, and that would be a multiplicity of targets with a multiplicity of highly sophisticated bombs, in this case aircraft, and very symbolic targets. And so this great deal of thought went into this, a great deal of time and money. This kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. So we can anticipate that maybe a year or more was probably devoted to planning this attack, and there may be others coming.
Mr. Livingston, I remember that the FBI has been concerned for some time about the number of cells harboring terrorists in America that have been growing. Is that true?
Well, there clearly are a number of people in the United States that have been the beneficiaries of our relatively liberal immigration policy that have hidden within various communities here and have expressed very strong anti-American sentiments. Whether that can be translated into terrorism at this point is open to question. I would suspect that what we will see in this case are perhaps foreign nationals who have arrived in the United States strictly to carry out this mission, hijack these aircrafts, and take them to their targets. Very similar to what we saw in that millennial potential attack when a man was arrested at the border in Washington State, who was going to carry out bombing attacks in the United States. He was an outsider who had been sent here to do that.
All right, Neil Livingston, thank you very much. I also have on the phone now Anthony Lake, Tony Lake, a former National Security Advisor to President Clinton, who's been a longtime student of the prospect of terrorism in this country, recently wrote a riveting fictional account of the various scenarios that the United States may have to deal with. But even in your most wildest imaginative days, Tony, you could not have anticipated something like this.
No, it's terrible. It's hard to say you can be lucky in any respect in something in such a catastrophe. But one of the great dangers still lurking out there is that it could have involved some kind of weapon of mass destruction.
But at the same time, it's hard to understate the amount of damage that has been done here physically and certainly in terms of loss of life. When you have an institution like the Pentagon attacked, the World Trade Center is attacked, and the plane that went to Pittsburgh might have been headed for the Capitol or the White House, for God's sake.
No, this is terrible. As I said, a catastrophe. Clearly a very sophisticated terrorist attack. Our intelligence community has headed off some in the past year or two. Their ability to evade our usual intelligence gathering methods in order to pull this off is extraordinary. And one question now we need to focus on is not only why did this happen, but where do we go from here?
Well, short term, if you were the National Security Advisor now back in your old office in the White House, what would be your recommendations in terms of a suppression of some of our normal liberties that we have in this country?
Well, we mustn't defeat our liberties in trying to defend them. I think what I would be urging now is, first of all, of course, get all the information we can immediately while dealing with the human dimensions of this catastrophe. And then thinking ahead, I think there are three fronts we have to act on. One, there must be, once we have identified the source of this, there must be an American response to this of some kind. Secondly, I hope that this will encourage us to even think in new ways about the nature of our security threats and increase our preparations, for example, for the Coast Guard in defending our ports against possible incidents like this, Customs, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and improving our organization for dealing with catastrophes like that. There's been progress on all these fronts, but not enough. And finally, and I think this is very important, we need to recognize that there is only one group out there that is trying to kill Americans, and that are these terrorists. We are at war with them, and it is not enough for us to attack simply on an American basis. We need to develop a global strategy for a global alliance, for a global war against these terrorists, including, for example, making sure that any nation pays a terrible price when it provides sanctuary for terrorists.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Middleton in the News Channel 2 newsroom. We will stay with NBC's continuing coverage of today's attack on America. Locally, though, caution is the key word. There have been no threats locally, but there has been plenty of reaction. All air travel is shut down. This is a live look at OIA from one of our sky cams. Meanwhile, Amtrak and Greyhound have both suspended all operations. County courthouses throughout Central Florida have been shut down. Disney has shut down all of its parks, as has SeaWorld, Universal, and Wet n Wild. This is a shot at Epcot from another sky cam. All on-site theme park hotels, though, do remain open to accommodate guests. Again, all of these moves are strictly precautionary. All state universities are also closed, but all local public schools are open, and you may pick up your child early if you wish. Meanwhile, Flagler, Brevard, and Polk counties have canceled all after-school activities. The U.S. military is obviously on high alert today, coast to coast, including Patrick Air Force Base in Cape Canaveral. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office is urging people to avoid that area because of security checkpoints that are now up. It could be a major mess. News Channel 2's Dave McDaniel has an update there.
At Patrick Air Force Base, they never get into the intricate details of their security measures, but all you have to do is look across the street, and you can see they're on alert. In full fatigues, with helmets, automatic weapons, and a bomb-sniffing dog by their side, it's nobody in or out of the main gate at Patrick Air Force Base.
Every day that we come here, our security forces work as vigilantly as possible to keep our bases as safe as possible. In the light of today's actions, we have taken actions that we deem necessary to meet what's happened today. I've never experienced anything like this, and to tell you the truth, I have several friends that work at the Pentagon. I'm a public affairs officer. Our headquarters for Air Force Public Affairs is in the Pentagon, so I'm truthfully worried about some of my friends up there. But we'll do our job until we find out what's really going on up there.
It's not clear whether anybody from Patrick Air Force Base will be going to other parts of the nation to help in the national security, but all non-essential people at this base have been sent home. At Patrick Air Force Base, Dave McDaniel, News Channel 2.
The Islamic Society of Central Florida has issued a statement today condemning the attack and calling for a swift capture and punishment of the attackers. Well, what's occurring locally is being repeated in towns and cities all across America today. Precautionary shutdowns, including now Major League Baseball, soccer, and professional golf, all are postponed. Stay tuned to News Channel 2 for continuous local updates and up-to-the-minute live crawls on the bottom of your screen for what some are now calling a second Pearl Harbor.
David Bloom is in Midtown Manhattan now with a view over the city skyline. And David, it is still stunning for those of us who live here to look behind you and not see the twin trade towers.
Well, Tom, it is a horrific scene behind me looking from Midtown Manhattan to Lower Manhattan. And if anything, it's gotten more disheartening as the hours have passed. In this sense, the billowing cloud of smoke and debris that you see behind me is in fact growing. More smoke, more debris floating up into the air. The best estimates, Tom, that the New York Police Department is making at this hour in terms of casualties is only to say that they expect them to go in terms of dead. And know that the victims are being shipped to individual hospitals, not merely here in Manhattan, but in the entire tri-state area, in Connecticut, in New Jersey as well. One hospital, St. Vincent's in Greenwich Village, reports simply being overwhelmed with casualties. They say that they've put out an all-points bulletin for burn specialists and plastic surgeons. They need all the help they get, and it's no doubt all the hospitals do here in Manhattan. Here is the sequence of events starting with the first terrorist attack this morning. The first plane attacks the World Trade Center's South Tower at approximately 8:42 Eastern Time. Airline officials say at least 2 American Airlines flights and 2 United Airlines flights were hijacked today, and that the attack planes were the hijacked domestic flights. Roughly 21 minutes later, approximately 9:03 Eastern Time, the second large jetliner can be seen taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's North Tower. Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the 2 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling and in some cases jumping from the 2 buildings. At approximately 9:40 a.m. in Washington, D.C., a third hijacked plane crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, one side of the building collapsing. Non-essential personnel from federal buildings, including the White House and the U.S. Capitol, are evacuated. 9:59 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside. 1/2 hour later, at approximately 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In a separate but apparently related crash, a fourth hijacked plane, a Boeing 767, crashes in western Pennsylvania, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. The FAA closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace. At this hour, airline and FAA officials believe the 4 hijacked planes include American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 90 passengers and crew aboard, crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Washington Dulles to LAX with 64 passengers and crew, believed to have been the plane, crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 175, bound from Boston to Los Angeles with 65 people on board. By early accounts, the plane which crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower. And finally, United Airlines Flight 93, the Boeing 757, which crashed in western Pennsylvania, carrying 45 passengers and crew. As to who might be responsible for this series of terrorist attacks, as you mentioned, Tom, has yet no claim of responsibility, but we certainly can tell you what senior U.S. intelligence officials, both in this administration and in the Clinton administration, are telling us, that the prime suspect is clearly the Saudi-born terrorist Osama bin Laden. One official told us that only he has the capability, the experience, and the motivation to carry out an attack like this. But again, that is just their initial speculation, finger-pointing. We clearly don't know at this hour who's responsible for this devastating and horrific attack.
Thank you very much, NBC's David Bloom. It goes without saying that whoever is responsibility, this is an act of war declared on the United States, a terrorist act of war, unprecedented in our nation's history. The United States was attacked, of course, 60 years ago this year, at Pearl Harbor. 2,400 people were killed. The Japanese military attacking an American military installation that got us involved in World War II. But this terrorist war, they used innocent Americans on commercial airliners to attack other innocent Americans, and they struck at the heart of our civilian life in New York City. And they've caused great psychological damage across the country as well, to say nothing of their attack on the symbol of our military strength, that is the Pentagon. And they took innocent people to their deaths in Pittsburgh in the crash of that hijacked airliner as well. NBC's Rahema Ellis is down near the World Trade Center. Rahema?
Tom, I am 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. The sky is dark with thick black smoke. Apparently, there are still fires burning. Some of the emergency workers told me that they cannot get into the exact area of the World Trade Center to help people whom they fear are trapped in the rubble because the fires are still burning, in some instances, out of control. Just a few moments ago, and just only 2 blocks from here, we were at the NYU Downtown Hospital. It is the only emergency room in the lower portion of Manhattan. It was the place where the first victims from this blast were taken, and hospital officials tell us they have turned their cafeteria into a triage area. They have people lined, and they say victims are wall to wall with inside that cafeteria and all throughout the hospital. Everyone has been called into service to assist in this blast. I talked with a man who was able to walk out of the hospital. His name was Peter DeCerbo. He was on the 47th floor of the World Trade Tower, number 1. He said when the first explosion occurred, he said he felt the building shake. He became frightened, as of his co-workers, he said. They didn't know what to do. Finally, he said, and quickly, they started to run down the stairs, 47 flights. And he said he actually carried a woman on his shoulders down those 47 flights with him. Another man who was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange had come out of the building and was standing. He looked up, and he literally saw the second tower of the World Trade Tower come crashing to the ground. He said he saw it coming down, and then he and hundreds of people around him started to run. When he got to a point of some near safety, the man, who's 37 years old, said he dropped to his knees and he started to pray because he thought that he was going to be dead. As one emergency worker said to me, he said, "Do you know what day this is?" And I said, "It's September 11th. He said, "Yes, it's 911. And all of New York right now is in a state of 911. Tom?
All right, thank you very much. NBC's Rahema Ellis with a vivid account of what has been going on down there. We should also point out
status here, threat condition Delta, the highest alert
on terrorism. No offense to my colleagues. Let's go back to Lower Manhattan, where Bob Jameson is with George Stephanopoulos. And Bob has been visiting hospitals in the last little while, and so I think the two of you together can bring us up to date on the scene.
George, if I might, I'll start first because I've just returned from St. Vincent's Hospital, which, Peter, is a little more than a mile from the World Trade Center and is a principal destination today for those who were injured in this disaster. And as one measure of how large it is, by midday there were about 200 people, 18 of them critically injured, who were brought to St. Vincent's, which is about 20 more than were injured, than were brought to St. Vincent's after the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. The injuries that the doctors are reporting are not principally respiratory injuries, which was the case in 1993, but these are largely crushing injuries. And Peter, 5 hours after the first plane went into the World Trade Center, ambulances are still arriving regularly at St. Vincent's. They are conducting triage, classifying the degree of injury outside on the sidewalk in front of St. Vincent's, and they don't have a clear idea of how many more injured may go there, as well as the other hospitals in New York, and now we hear some in New Jersey.
And Peter, that's in part because we've just got a report from John McKenzie out in the field who talked to William Hull, the head of the Port Authority, who said that formal search and rescue operations haven't even begun yet. The bulk of the effort right now by the police and the fire department and others is simply to establish the integrity, the safety of the World Trade Center building. Second, what's left on the site of the World Trade Center. Secondly, Peter, they reported that there's a staggering number of firefighters still on the site, up to 200 that they can't account for yet. They were able to talk to one firefighter on the scene, though, who said that their biggest problem now is not having fire hydrants to put out these small pockets of fires that are cropping up all across the site. And secondly, Peter, there's a problem now with broken gas lines, which they fear could ignite further explosions.
George, could
Peter,
I just...
if I might add.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I just add one thing. I was struck by something at St. Vincent's. The Red Cross, as you may know, has put out a plea for blood donors, particularly those with the less common types of blood, such as O. But even before that plea went out, thousands of people spontaneously showed up at St. Vincent's, thousands of people, and many of them told us, this is what we think we can do to help. We can't do anything else. Sitting at home watching on television won't help, but this might.
Well, Bob, you're quite right. And in fact, no reason you would have heard us, but we mentioned a short while ago that blood donors in Nebraska, one of their first instincts, or people in Nebraska, one of their first instincts was to go and respond to a request for blood donations because, as you've just pointed out and we've said before, there's a critical shortage of blood in the United States. And we've heard from the Red Cross any number of times in the last year or so that the country needs blood and it's not going to be available. And so it is reassuring to hear in New York City people doing that instinctively. Bob, let me ask you both, and start with you and then George. My sense of the recovery, if that's the word for it, of this phase of what's going on down there is to deal with people who are injured, who are clearly not in or under the World Trade Towers. Am I right?
Yes, I think that's correct, and a large number of them, in one way or another, are some of the emergency and rescue people. And then the next step, as we have seen in other disasters, will be to see who else there is.
And George, we've seen buildings collapsed. It sometimes takes days to discover people under collapsed buildings, and we now have a circumstance. Do we have any idea how many people got before the building collapsed? We don't, do we?
Not a very good idea, Peter. We do know that there was some warning. As I said earlier, we spoke to some of the security guards who were on the site, and they did have some warning. There was a feeling that the second building was going to collapse, so the evacuation did begin from people as high up as in the 82nd and 86th floors, but we don't know how many were able to get out. And we do know, Peter, from at least one of the security guards, that they were nowhere near complete. They hadn't come even close to completing the evacuation, but we don't have numbers.
And Peter, adding a little bit to the confusion, the collapse of the North Tower may have affected other buildings around there, as well as the collapse of the Millennium Hotel.
Well, thank you both very much, and both of you come back at any time that you want and can or contribute to this. We can tell you that the military. Thank you both very much, Bob Jameson and George Stephanopoulos.
Thank you.
We can tell you that the military. The governor said earlier, the governor of New York, that the National Guard was going to come in, and there's National Guard on station in some parts of the city anyway, is setting up a temporary morgue on the piers in New York City near West 57th Street, which is where people often take off to go and have a tour of New York City from the air, and close by where the famous Circle Line leaves, so people can take a tour around the island of Manhattan and see what it looks like. And none of that traffic is permitted today. The only traffic we have seen on the Hudson River has been, as has been pointed out to us several times, John Miller particularly, pointing out that ferries are taking wounded across the river, across the Hudson River to New Jersey. ABC's Cynthia McFadden is on the phone at the moment. She is calling us from Bellevue Hospital, which is over on the east side of Manhattan, quite some distance from this. Sylvia, do you hear me? Cynthia, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah, we've been able to get into the Disaster Command Center, which is located here at Bellevue. As you say, it's about 20 or 30 blocks north and east of the actual site of the Twin Towers. But this is where the city puts its resources to prepare for an emergency. They rehearse here, practice here for disasters, and today we were allowed in the first group of journalists to go inside and see where they were running the disaster relief from. Let me paint a picture for you, if I might, of the room. It's about a 30 by 15 room, about 10 people crowded around a conference table, about 15 phone lines coming into the room. The mayor's office, emergency services, police and fire, all of those efforts being coordinated through this room. It was surprisingly calm, surprisingly quiet. It is located in the heart of the emergency room here at Bellevue Hospital, Peter, and the emergency room itself is busy. They've had about 140 to 150 people come through Bellevue so far. We've also had the opportunity to talk to the director of the hospital here and to the man who heads up the emergency room. I can tell you a little bit about the injuries if you'd like.
Please do.
Because this is a hospital further away, they're getting the less seriously injured, although, having said that, of the 140 or 50 people, 40 of them are classified in serious condition. 2 were dead on arrival. They have 1 baby who is being treated. 3 to 5 operating rooms are currently going with what the doctor characterized as extremely serious surgeries. The doctor running the operation here said that they have sent a team of physicians closer to the site, and they're going to be setting up tent hospitals closer to the site to help some of the enormous flow of injuries. Nobody made it here to this hospital until about 2 hours after the blast. And they believe, I've been listening to the coverage, they believe that it's not going to be for many more hours until they feel the full brunt of this over here.
Okay. Thank you, Cynthia, very much. Come back to us, please. When you get even better handle of this. We've talked a little bit about the blood shortage, which, as I said, is a national issue. But in New York City, there are supplies of blood so far. People did respond very quickly and lined up ready to give blood at some of the blood centers here. There is a supply of O-type blood. O negative appears, as best we can understand from the people who are collecting it, is the most important kind of blood needed at the moment because it's the universal donor, meaning anyone can actually get it. Now, there's a slight bit more of information, like all information today, reasonably suspect at the outset, but the Associated Press is reporting that this airliner, this United Airlines jet, which crashed in Pennsylvania, which is a American Airlines, my apologies, United Airlines Flight 93. I don't quite know exactly what aircraft it was, a 767, I think, which we assessed uncertain about, did not know why it had crashed, whether it was part of this overall operation this morning. The AP is now quoting a man who minutes earlier, saying he was a passenger on the plane, told an emergency dispatcher in a cell phone call that we are being hijacked. We are being hijacked. Treat that, as you do all the information we give you today, as being preliminary at best, sometimes wrong. I think we've been pretty good about it today, and certainly confused, because listening to the mayor, listening to the governor of the state, both of whom we talked to, listening to the senator in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, listening to all of our analysts, listening to everybody, the country is still very much in the middle of, if not immediate post-event chaos, certainly in terms of trauma and trying to get a handle on what the hell's been going on here. And as we've said before, when you look at the television pictures of the Trade Center collapsed upon itself, these are buildings 110 stories high, and where thousands and thousands and thousands of people work. And I know on occasion we can run the images of it to the point of offensiveness. I hope we're not there, but this is what it looked like when one of the trade towers just appeared to either peel away or collapse on itself, but from top to bottom, 110 stories to the bottom. First one, the southern tower, Tower 1 or Tower 2, it doesn't matter what, just one tower and then the other, and then the other tower sometime later, which John Miller said the cops picked up very quickly, was looking weak and bending or leaning in one particular direction, indicating that when those two aircraft, one hitting one tower, the other hitting another, had gone straight into those towers with such force that even at the midpoint of the building, or in that case 2/3 up, something had happened to so totally weaken the infrastructure that this was like peeling a banana, except that it was full of people, or had many, many people in it. I think we have Senator John McCain on the phone from Washington. Am I right, Senator?
Yes, Peter, how are you?
I'm well, sir, thank you. I'm not well. None of us are well. You know that.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
Well, I think that this act obviously is one which would constitute an act of war. I believe that the American people should remain calm and rally behind our president, and I am confident that our military and our president will find out the perpetrators of this outrage, and we will not only punish those responsible, but ensure that something like this never happens again. And clearly, we need to look at our intelligence capabilities.
I don't mean for 1 second, Senator, to belittle the necessary thing you must say today, which is we'll find those who are responsible and we'll punish them, because Tony Cordesman has just pointed out very effectively how often we don't find the people and we don't get to punish them. But you say it an act of war.
Yes.
Do you believe that if another country is somehow the patron of an individual or a group of individuals who has done this, we should go to war with that country?
Absolutely, because they have committed atrocity on a scale that's unprecedented in history that I know of. Everybody's talking about a second Pearl Harbor. At least that was an attack on military targets, not on the civilian community. This is an unspeakable outrage, and clearly we can and must find out who perpetrated it. And Tony Cordesman and I have great respect for him, but I believe that we have the capability to find it out, and we need to improve our intelligence capabilities, particularly in the area of human intelligence. We have wonderful satellite capabilities and technical capabilities. In the late 70s and early 80s, we, for all intents and purposes, dismantled our human intelligence capability, which divines motives, and that's something technical intelligence cannot do.
Well, I think those of us who cover intelligence in any way, Senator, know that human intelligence, or HUMINT as they call it in the trade, has been very difficult, particularly in places like Afghanistan. So just assume for a second, well, no, don't assume anything, but are you desperately frustrated at the moment in some respects because this was sort of, in many ways, this was bound to happen in some measure, and we may not be able to get at the perpetrators?
No, I think that among many other things, obviously sorrow is the overriding emotion, but also I don't think our lives will ever be the same again in some respect, especially those who use airliners with some frequency. There's always been questions and studies and tests of our airport security systems, and they've always found breaches in them. Obviously, that's going to have to be addressed, and that's going to be very inconvenient for Americans. But at the same time, we also have to reevaluate the importance of making sure that anyone who wants to try it is incapable of doing so. But the best way to address it, obviously, is going to the source.
Your Democratic colleague, Senator Biden, said a while ago, the terrorist wins again when it alters American lifestyle. I assume you believe the same thing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the things that have been inflicted on the American people is, I mean, it staggers the imagination. And yet I believe that the best thing that we can do as Americans is remain calm, rally behind the President of the United States, and know with confidence that we will take whatever steps are necessary to prevent this from happening again. I don't think that there's any reason for Americans to feel a sense of panic.
Okay. Thank you, Senator McCain, very much indeed. Appreciate your time. Senator John McCain of Arizona, who knows a lot about violence, and many people in the country will think knows a lot about leadership as well. Former presidential candidate, often talking about doing it, or often considered to be doing it again. Claire Shipman is in Washington. Claire, where's Mr. Bush?
Well, Peter, we have a little bit of news on that front. As you know, he is in the air again on his way somewhere from Shreveport, Louisiana. We have been told by sources that he will not be coming to Washington. He is going to make another stop at an undisclosed secure location so that he can talk to people from there on the ground. His security team can assess just how safe it is back here in Washington. As you mentioned earlier, that there must be great political pressure for him to get back to Washington. These sources confirm just that. The political team wants him back home. He wants to come back home. His security team does not feel it is safe right now. They do think, though, and they're guessing right now, that he might be able to get back at some point this evening. But again, he's got at least one more stop. Another interesting point along those lines.
Hold on, one more stop?
One more stop between Shreveport and Washington. He's on his way now, we're told, to another undisclosed location that his security team considers secure. They won't tell us where it is, obviously.
But do we know? So, in other words, this one more stop is another security stop dictated by the Secret Service?
Indeed it is, and we would be guessing if we talked about another Air Force base or something of the kind, but they have a number of stops, and I'm told this one is not anywhere in the direction of Washington, but they have a number of places they can take him.
Let me ask you this. Have you heard any mention whatsoever of the possibility the President will come to New York?
No, there was a rumor to that effect earlier, Peter, but that was shot down, and my sources tell me he is not going anywhere near New York right now. That situation would create chaos that New York just doesn't need at this point.
Absolutely.
They've also told us that their full security plan is in effect. They do have the House and Senate leadership out of town. Condoleezza Rice is the only senior official remaining at the White House, and she will remain at the White House to try to coordinate efforts from there. Mrs. Bush has also been spirited away. She was on Capitol Hill this morning set to address Congress. She's been taken to an undisclosed location, Peter.
Now, there was some mention that but there was some mention of the fact that the United Airlines aircraft that crashed east to southeast of Pittsburgh may have been, in fact, going in the direction of Camp David. Had you heard that?
I heard that, as you did. My security sources don't know anything about that, so we haven't been able to confirm anything along those lines.
Then we'll leave it alone. Claire, thanks very much. We'll come back to you as soon as we know where the President is going to go next. Seems a little bit strange. Pierre Thomas, working the phones on the FBI. What have you got, Pierre?
Well, one of the first things that they are focused on, obviously, is the injured, but the next priority is to get to Dulles International Airport, which they are, and Boston Logan. They are going to talk to the Boston United and American airline officials. They're trying to get a sense of who was on the plane. Early on, they're very limited in what they can do. They're trying to assess the situation, but one of the first things they can try to do is try to get a sense of who was on the plane, try to begin to check out aliases, and that might lead them in some investigative direction. But they're very limited in the early stages in terms of what they can do.
Exactly. Many thanks. And as you and John Miller have reminded us several times today, we're covering a tragedy and we are covering a crime. And so the FBI is now beginning to get things together in terms of trying to piece together the elements of crime. The only thing you get out of the airplane, one assumes at this point, is a long time from now, evidence of explosives on board that were not the gas tanks, the black boxes, which survive pretty much anything. I think it is our experience. But in terms of trying to chase down the human beings, going to those two airports to see who got on board and checking the passenger list.
Absolutely. Things that they can't get at right now. They can't do very much investigative work at the scenes. Right. So where they go is where the plane took off from. Talk to those officials. One official told me, quote, "We're trying to talk to any and everyone who touched that plane, from maintenance workers to the people who ticketed the persons getting on the plane."
Great. Thanks, Pierre. Keep at it. By the way, the Federal Aviation Administration says that the earliest that they will allow flights to resume, this may change, will be noon tomorrow. More than 24 hours after they first ordered all aircraft not to take off and then all aircraft to land as soon as possible. And I think that all domestic U.S. flights are now currently on the ground. Some international flights coming from overseas are still on their way to West Coast airports and still in the air. But what is quite staggering here in a way is the FAA says they will only allow flights to resume at noon tomorrow. We're talking, if you add it up, about approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 36,000 flights, back and forth and up and down, and all the interim places across the United States. We all know, those of us who travel by air on a regular basis, exactly how difficult air travel is and how much of it there is at the moment. But there's a outstanding example of what it means to put out an order like that. 36,000 flights going to be halted. In fact, I think Charlie Gibson, my colleague who was here when this happened this morning, has been looking particularly at this dimension of it. Charlie?
Well, Peter, I just found a note that all U.S. commercial aircraft, I wasn't absolutely certain what you said a moment ago, but that all U.S. commercial aircraft that were not involved in hijackings today, obviously, but we know what's happened to those planes that were hijacked, but all U.S. commercial aircraft have landed, and as you mentioned, there will be no flights resumed until noon tomorrow. A couple of just incidental events. Prince Andrew of England was headed for Atlanta when all of this happened. His plane turned around. King Abdullah of Jordan was also headed for the United States. And we now read that flights, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, has canceled all flights over London because of concern of air security over that city. There are a number of other things going on. Some of these pale in significance to what's happening in New York and Washington, but we want to bring them to you anyway. And I'm going to give you some details of what are happening in various states around the country. Much of this redundant to some things Peter had said, some of it new information. This Sunday's Emmys Awards ceremonies in Los Angeles has been postponed because of today's terrorist attacks on the East Coast. The head of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences says he's not going to set a new date for the ceremony until the national mourning that is going to take place is over. There were Latin Grammy Awards scheduled for tonight in Los Angeles. Those have been canceled. In the sports world, as we mentioned a while ago, and there's some other cancellations as well, the 15 baseball games have now been canceled around the country that were to be played in the major leagues tonight. The minor leagues postponed all of their playoff games. Their regular seasons are over, but the playoff games in the minor leagues have been canceled. The commissioner of baseball said in the interest of security and out of sense of deep mourning for the national tragedy that has occurred today, all Major League Baseball games for today have been canceled. The PGA Tour has canceled the beginning of tournaments on Thursday, and whether they will be further delayed is uncertain. Major League Soccer postponed all of the games it had scheduled for tomorrow night, and the National Football League says it is mulling over whether to postpone this weekend's schedule. Obviously, the effects of this are going to reverberate for many days, many weeks, many months, and so there are those kinds of cancellations being discussed.
Okay, thanks, Charlie.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I just, as we want to go to try to bring it back together for people who, a lot of people have been not with us all day. The thousands and millions of people may have been glued to their televisions, impossible not to. But ABC's John Donovan has been following the events of the last few hours, and he has managed to put together, I suppose we could call it a chronology or a timeline, if you will. But here is some sense of what happened from the beginning.
We want to tell you what we know as we know it, but we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at
the first thing any television cameras saw this morning was this. Just before 9 o'clock, roughly 15 minutes earlier, an American Airlines jet hijacked from Boston had crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. There were 92 people on board.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
Oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
Has just I did not see a plane go in.
Minutes later, the second plane, the second tower. The fireball ate up the aircraft. It was a United Airlines flight, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles. There had been 65 people on board.
Some sort of a concerted.
I was happened to look on the first tower, and I actually saw people waving where the first plane crashed through, and then it was unbelievable seeing this second jet come crashing into the second tower. What is going on?
New York City was staggered.
As soon as you got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky.
We're going to interrupt this. We'll come back to this, I promise you, to go to a news conference being held by the Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani.
And then, Governor, thank you very much for your assistance and your help and your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership through this crisis. This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed. The first step has to be to make sure we do everything in our power to protect the people and to save the lives of those whose lives are still at risk and to help those who have been injured. And I want to commend the mayor, and I want to thank my colleagues from Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and the federal government have all offered and made ready support to help us deal with this ongoing crisis. The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the President, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, well, this is a horrible attack, and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude. We will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way, and we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion after that.
Could you tell us, do you expect any further attacks on New York? Is there anything to indicate that there could be more bombs, more planes out there? I know originally there was a report that 8 planes had been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by some?
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed, and we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us where the planes came from?
Warships coming into the port of New York?
I think to give the people of New York confidence, to show that the federal government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for the people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give us an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now in Lower Manhattan? The scope of this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago, and the governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600 as of about 15 minutes ago in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, and before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
Also, blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66th and Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed. And it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. And we finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to
Mr. Mayor, there were reports of a gas explosion related to this as well. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible explosion?
We don't believe that. We don't believe that's the case. No.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a
anything
precaution?
about where these aircraft came from? There was a report they may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to. Yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts. And
Governor,
What about security for the rest of the
city? On the part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is just compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both.
This has been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to
This
be
is
an
a
act of war?
this is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and the American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this has happened?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York City Police Department is fully deployed, not just in the rescue effort, but all throughout the city of New York, offering as much protection and as much security as we're capable of for the citizens of the city. And at this point, I believe that the people in New York City can demonstrate our resolve and our support for all of the people that were viciously attacked today by going about their lives and showing everyone that vicious, cowardly terrorists can't stop us from being a free country and a place that functions. And we'll do everything we can to make that point.
Jennifer Steinauer, please. Just a housekeeping thing. Can you tell us what's going to happen to the New York primary?
This morning, I issued an order suspending the primary across the state. There will be no primary today, and we'll reschedule it once we get through this.
Jennifer,
Mayor,
please.
can you please walk us through the municipal services right now? What's going on with the subways and the schools, the courts?
The subway, the schools, the chancellor, I commend the chancellor. He was on the phone a number of times with us. He coordinated very, very carefully what would happen. He thought it out, and he came up with a very good plan, which was essentially to keep the schools open, to keep the children in school, so we didn't have a large number of children in the different boroughs that would be released from school. They're being released, I shouldn't say as normal, but basically on the normal schedule. If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway is doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan, and throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the World Trade
I don't
Center?
think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How
many
is the
police
short
and
of
fire are
that
involved? How many
affected?
police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers as they come in, or like
All NYPD and FDNY officers are on duty now, and we're going to need all of them. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they get information?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
The National Guard looting or anything like that? Any lawlessness?
There have been no reports of lawlessness.
The governor of New York State, Governor George Pataki, the mayor, Mayor Giuliani, between him, the police commissioner just over on the right side of the picture there, the fire commissioner, the police commissioner more than anybody else being almost a restraining influence there, trying to say both to the governor and to the mayor, be careful what you say here. We don't have information on this, that, and the other thing. And on this question of casualties, it is the mayor who is attested to what everybody's got going, rushing around in their minds at the moment. More casualties, more than anyone can bear, but not willing to make perfect sense, not willing at this point to put a number on the people who they believe have been killed and or injured. The mayor did say that in one of the parks in the lower part of Manhattan, 1,500 people were regarded as walking wounded. They were aware of 600 people in local hospitals, and New York City has 170 hospitals, and as the mayor said, every one of them is available under these circumstances. And there are 150 critical conditions which were taken out, which were medevaced out or taken out under other circumstances, some of them going across the river to New Jersey. And in one case, according to the Canadian television network, saying had been airlifted as far away as Canada in order to get special medical care. Canada has several very strong centers in burn treatment. So it may be one of the reasons that patients have gone up that far. The mayor returning again to this thing which has clearly moved him, I think, more than anything else today, getting down there and seeing the 2 trade towers before they collapsed on themselves and seeing the fires burning up high. And he said it every time, and seeing the people jumping from the top of the trade towers, driven to their deaths by the encroaching fire in the
total collapse of both of these towers of the World Trade Center. There will be a high loss of life. Some people are believed trapped in the remains as we speak, and operations are being mounted to try to get to them. You remember those scenes from Oklahoma City. Remember Oklahoma City, one federal building, terrible as it was, how long it took to get organized, to get those people who were trapped in the remains, as was the case in Oklahoma City. Many heroic deeds this day, most of those deeds we do not yet know, but police, firemen, ordinary citizens have performed their heroic deeds this day. And while many lives have been lost, many lives have been saved. And it's a day that will, as was the case with Pearl Harbor, live in infamy in American history. We go to John Roberts in Washington. John, perhaps bring people up to date on where the president is and where he isn't at this hour.
Well, Dan,
fighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried much later. And maybe we should just close now and give you a briefing later. And I would just ask everyone, I talked to Cardinal Egan before because he's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Say a prayer. And ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than vicious, cowardly terrorists, and we're going to overcome this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, Mayor. Do you know when the next briefing will be?
Rare exhortation these days by a public official recommending that the people of the city of New York say a prayer for not only the city but those who have perished today in this coordinated terrorist attack. On the phone with us, been very kind to hold while we have listened to the New York City Mayor's first extended briefing, is Congressman Bob Stump, Republican of Arizona, not just a member of Congress, but chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. And Mr. Chairman, what has today's horrific series of incidents taught you?
Well, I think that, and I hope that it wakes up some of these people who think this country is not under threat from terrorists or other means. Perhaps it will help us. You know, we've tried to increase our human intelligence assets, but through increased funding, we have not been able to do that. You know, if you don't see a shiny plane or a new tank sitting over there, people are a little reluctant to vote. We are desperately short of human intelligence in this country. I know these kind of terrorist groups, or I presume that these kind are hard to penetrate sometimes because of their ethnicity and other reasons, but we certainly need to increase our efforts in this area.